The lights in the hall were on, the guests were waiting anxiously, and the millionaire smiled as if he had already conquered the world. But in a few seconds, everything would fall apart. A woman with worn clothes, bare feet, and a sharp gaze would appear at the door to shout a phrase that would silence even the violins. Don't trust her. She's hiding something very terrible. And in that instant, the lives of everyone in that place would change forever. Because what seemed like a fairy tale, in fact, it hid the most calculated scam that city had ever seen. This story you are going to hear now is based on real events, and holds a secret so deep that it made a man tear up his own future the moment he was about to say yes. So, before you continue, do two important things. Subscribe to the channel now. Here we tell you the most shocking, moving, and surprising true stories you've ever heard. And stay with me until the end. Because the bombshell that will be revealed in the last chapter will change the way you see love, trust, and even loyalty. Now, take a deep breath, because what will happen next, it's not just a story, it's a warning. The clock was almost noon when the immense doors of the main hall opened. The entire space seemed like something out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceiling, casting golden reflections across the white marble walls. Arrangements of imported flowers, rare orchids, lilies, and red roses were arranged on each table, exuding a sweet, sophisticated perfume that mingled with the faint aroma of champagne. The guests whispered among themselves, all impeccably dressed, many of them influential business people, politicians, and low-key celebrities. The women sported glittering jewelry, pearl necklaces, sparkling earrings, and dresses embroidered with stones that reflected light like stars. The men, in well-cut suits, adjusted their ties as they surveyed the room with approving glances. In the center, a white walkway led to the altar, decorated with tall, gently flickering candles. The silence, punctuated by the soft sounds of a string quartet, created an almost palpable atmosphere of anticipation. It was the most talked-about wedding day in town. The groom, a middle-aged but still imposing man, stood waiting. His face displayed a restrained smile, but his eyes betrayed anxiety. He was a well-known millionaire, owner of businesses spread throughout the world. A man who had overcome poverty and achieved everything: fortune, power, and respect. For many, he was a model of success, and there, in front of everyone, he was about to unite with the woman who, in the eyes of those watching, was the great prize of his life. The bride appeared next, walking slowly down the aisle. Her dress was a work of art, white silk embroidered with silver threads that reflected the light like liquid diamonds. Her veil fluttered gently, and each step was accompanied by the clicking of hidden cell phones from guests, trying to capture that historic moment. She smiled, a perfect, almost rehearsed smile. Her eyes roamed the audience with a triumphant gleam, as if she had already won every battle. To the onlookers, she was the picture of perfection, the most beautiful young woman, winning the heart and fortune of a powerful man. But there was something few noticed, a subtle, almost imperceptible detail that would change everything. As she walked, her fingers clutched the bouquet with unusual tightness, as if hiding an inner tension, and in a brief instant, her gaze hardened. A cold, calculating look that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, replaced once again by an angelic smile. The millionaire didn't notice. He was enchanted, as always. For him, this woman was a childhood dream come true. Everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. As respectful silence filled the hall. Bracing for the justice of the piece's words, an unexpected voice cut through the air like a blade, hoarse, tremulous, but firm enough to silence even the string quartet. Don't trust her. She's hiding something very terrible. The shock was immediate. Heads turned toward the salon door, and there she was, a woman in dirty, torn clothes, her disheveled hair falling over her tired face, her feet bare, a homeless woman. For a moment, no one breathed. The contrast was brutal, the absolute luxury of a millionaire wedding interrupted by the wretched figure of a stranger. Some guests laughed nervously, others whispered, "What is this crazy woman doing here?" The bride's eyes widened, then a wry smile escaped her. The millionaire, for his part, stood motionless, as if each of that woman's words had weighed a ton on his shoulders. The string quartet stopped, the justice of the piece froze, pen poised in midair, and the hall, which seconds before had vibrated with celebration, fell into a heavy silence. And this is where the story you will learn today begins. This story you are going to hear now is based on real events, and the revelation that is about to happen is so shocking, you won't believe it. Therefore, I have a request for you. Stay with me until the end of this video, because the bomb that will explode in this story can change the way you see trust, love, and even loyalty. And take advantage of this opportunity to subscribe to the channel now, because here you will find real, exciting stories full of twists and turns like the one you will learn about today. The Hall of Dreams. It was a sunny morning, and the sky seemed to shine with unusual intensity, as if even nature had been summoned to witness the event. In the city's most upscale neighborhood, on an avenue lined with century-old trees and historic mansions, that stood the majestic ballroom chosen for the most anticipated wedding of the year. Outside, imported cars parked in a line, uniformed chauffeurs opened doors for bejeweled ladies, while photographers and onlookers jostled for every detail. The hubbub was incessant. Each arriving guest was observed, analyzed, and commented on as if they were part of a carefully staged spectacle. Upon entering the ballroom's golden doors, the impact was immediate. The space was immense, decorated with imported white marble, imposing columns, and crystal chandeliers hanging like cascades of diamonds. The polished floor reflected the floral arrangements that filled every corner: Colombian roses, fragrant lilies, and rare orchids, brought exclusively for that day. The air had a sweet scent, a mix of fresh flowers and freshly opened champagne. In the center, a white petal-strewn walkway led to the altar. Tall candles flickered in silver candelabras, casting a soft light. The sound of a string quartet filled the room, playing a classical melody that made everyone's hearts race in unison. The tables were set to perfection. White linen napkins, silver cutlery, and crystal glasses awaited the feast. Waiters circulated discreetly, offering expensive drinks and sophisticated Everything exuded luxury. Everything screamed perfection. The groom, man of power at the center of that spectacle, was him. The groom, a middle-aged man with neatly slicked-back gray hair and a tailored Italian suit that molded his imposing posture. He was a well-known millionaire, owner of businesses spread across several countries. His fortune was the result of hard work, but also of cunning, courage, and, according to some, a good dose of luck. For many there, he represented the fulfillment of the ultimate dream, to rise from nothing and conquer everything. He already had power, prestige, and respect. But now he sought something that had always eluded him, a love he could call true. There was tenderness in his eyes as he looked at his bride, an almost youthful glow that contrasted with the weight of his age and his battle-scarred path. He believed, with all his might, that this woman was the ultimate prize of his life, the crowning achievement of his entire journey. The bride, beauty and mystery, and then she appeared. The bride, the vision of perfection that made all the guests hold their breath, dressed in a gown that looked like the work of angels, white silk embroidered with silver threads, encrusted with crystals that reflected every ray of light, transforming her into an almost celestial vision. The veil fluttered gently, following her firm, measured steps. Her face was delicate, her skin flawless, her lips shaped into a perfect smile. Her eyes, with an enigmatic glow, roamed over each guest with a mixture of superiority and enchantment. To those present, she was a spectacle, the young woman everyone had been talking about for the past few months. Beautiful, elegant, with irresistible charm. There was something beyond beauty, something that couldn't be captured by cameras or whispers. A detail imperceptible to many, but which didn't go unnoticed by the most attentive. His gaze hardened in seconds, transforming from sweet to cold, from angelic to calculating, and in a blink he was smiling again as if nothing had happened. That brief moment of coldness was like a shadow hidden behind the light, and soon, that shadow would come to the surface. The guests watched in reverent silence, as if witnessing a theatrical performance. For them, it was a privilege to witness the most talked-about wedding of the year. Businessmen whispered about the groom's business dealings. Socialites vied for the best seat. Undercover journalists took mental notes, ready to turn the event into headlines. Everything seemed to be under control. Everything was heading towards the happy ending everyone had hoped for. But not everyone was smiling. Some were more attentive, as if they sensed something strange was about to happen. The justice of the peace arranged his papers. The quartet lowered the volume, preparing the atmosphere for the solemn words. The millionaire took a deep breath. The bride clutched the bouquet tighter than necessary. Necessary, it was the moment that would seal their lives, or that would destroy them forever. That's when it happened. That's when it happened. The scream that changed everything from the back of the hall. A hoarse voice rent the air, shaky, but firm enough to paralyze every guest. Don't trust her. She's hiding something very terrible. The entire hall froze. The quartet fell silent. The strings stopped in mid-air. The justice of the peace looked up in alarm, and the guests exchanged incredulous looks. There, at the golden door of the hall, stood the figure no one expected. A woman in dirty, torn clothes, disheveled hair falling around her face, bare feet that marked the shiny marble with dust. A homeless person. The contrast was brutal. The absolute luxury of a millionaire's marriage against the poverty that entered like an open wound. Some laughed nervously. Others murmured indignantly. How did they let these people in here? How absurd. The bride shivered, first in surprise, then in fury. Her angelic smile disappeared, replaced by a look of hatred. The millionaire, however, remained motionless, as if each word from that stranger had hit his chest with the force of an arrow. The heavy silence. The hall fell silent. It was as if even the air had stopped circulating. The guests held their breath. The quartet remained with their bows suspended, without the courage to play another note, and everyone waited for the reaction from the groom of the bride, or that stranger who dared to interrupt the show. Here begins the story you will learn today, a story that holds such a shocking revelation, that to this day many still cannot believe it. What did that homeless woman know? Why did you risk entering a room where you weren't welcome? And what did she mean by something very terrible? To discover the truth and understand how this marriage turned into an unforgettable scandal, stay with me until the end of this video. And now take advantage of it. Subscribe to the channel, Here you will always find real, exciting stories full of twists and turns, like this one that begins with an unexpected scream and ends with a revelation that will leave you speechless. The impact of the scream, the words still echoed off the golden walls of the hall. Don't trust her. She's hiding something very terrible. The shock was so great that it seemed as if time had stopped. Everyone's eyes turned in the same direction. The imposing entrance, now desecrated by the presence of someone who shouldn't be there. The woman stood still for a few seconds, as if she too had felt the weight of her own words. Her breathing was labored, her thin shoulders rising and falling rapidly. Her clothes were dirty, stained with dust, and a life lived on the streets. Her disheveled hair fell over her face, but her eyes, oh, her eyes. They were eyes that held an unusual strength. There was a mixture of despair and conviction in them, as if she knew she would be humiliated, expelled, maybe even attacked. But even so, she couldn't keep quiet on in the hall. The reaction was immediate. A murmur rose like a wave. Words whispered between clenched teeth. Who let this woman in here? This is a scandal, a disgrace. Security, get her out of here right now. Some women clapped their hands over their mouths in horror. Men frowned indignantly. Young men whispered, laughing mockingly, as if watching a grotesque scene in the theater. To them, that woman was nothing more than an intruder, a worthless figure who dared to tarnish the perfection of the most luxurious event of the year. The bride, for a moment, was paralyzed. His smile froze. His eyes widened, but quickly the mask returned. She took a deep breath, forced a laugh, and took a few steps forward, holding the bouquet tightly. This has to be a bad joke, he said, his voice thick with irony. The room erupted in nervous giggles. She then continued, looking directly at her fiancé, are you really going to listen to a woman who doesn't even know how to take a shower? Look at her, Ricardo. She's just a beggar, a poor thing trying to steal our happiness. The words came out sharp, but there was something in her eyes, a spark of anger, with fear, of contained fury. The millionaire, however, did not respond. He remained motionless, staring at the homeless woman. It was as if that voice had awakened something inside him, an instinct, a doubt. Why, among so many people, would a stranger risk everything to say those words? His heart, which had been pounding in ecstasy for the ceremony just seconds before, now felt heavy. A shadow of uncertainty settled over his mind. The courage of the homeless woman. The woman took a deep breath and took a step forward. The sound of her bare feet against the marble echoed louder than the string quartet had played. Her eyes fixed on the groom. His voice trembled, but he did not back down. I know I don't belong here. I know you look at me like trash, but someone needs to tell the truth. This woman is not who you think she is, and if you marry her, your life will be destroyed. The hall erupted in murmurs. The words hung in the air like poison. The bride lost control. The smile disappeared. His face hardened, and his eyes flashed with fury. Security, he shouted. Get this crazy woman out of here now. Two men in suits began to approach the resident, but she raised her trembling hand as if begging for a few more seconds. Please listen to me, he begged. I know what I'm saying. I saw it with my own eyes. She's hiding something terrible, and I have proof. The hall plunged into shock again. The word evidence echoed loudly. The millionaire felt a shiver run down his spine. He looked at his bride, who was now red with anger, and then turned his eyes to the wretched woman before him. It was impossible to ignore the contrast. On one side, the luxurious perfection of a bride that everyone admired. On the other, the humiliating poverty of a stranger that no one wanted to see. And yet, the truth seemed closer to the mouth of the one everyone despised. The homeless woman said the word evidence. The hall turned into a volcano ready to explode. Some guests murmured in shock. Others tried to laugh to break the tension, but no one could hide their discomfort. This is ridiculous, a joke, exclaimed a famous businessman, shaking his head in indignation. Security, aren't you going to do anything? Asked a lady in a gold-embroidered dress, but despite the pressure, the security guards hesitated. They were waiting for a sign from the groom, and the groom remained motionless. The bride, seeing the hesitation, took a few steps forward, her face filled with anger. Ricardo, look at me, she said, her voice trembling but firm. Are you going to let this intruder ruin our day? Are you going to believe a beggar who doesn't even know my name? The hall awaited his answer, but the millionaire remained silent. His gaze was fixed on that wretched woman who dared to face everyone with nothing but her own voice. The bride, desperate, turned to the guests. Just look at how far the envious will go. She's nothing more than a sick person, someone who wants to show off at the expense of our happiness. The words were like knives, and still, the resident did not back down. A wave of contemptuous looks fell upon the stranger. Some laughed at her, others shook their heads in denial. A child whispered to his mother, "Mommy, why is that woman so dirty?" And the mother answered in a harsh tone, "Because they are people who have nowhere to fall dead. Don't look at them." The resident's heart sank, but she took a deep breath. She was already used to looks of contempt. I'd heard worse words than that on cold nights on the sidewalks, but at that moment, she knew she couldn't keep quiet. The price didn't matter. She lifted her chin, her eyes fixed on her fiancé. I know everyone here despises me. I know I'm nothing to you, but listen to me. This woman is hiding something terrible, and if you marry her, you'll lose everything you've built. A heavy silence fell over the hall. It was as if the walls were breathing along with each beat of the groom's heart. The bride, now almost beside herself, cried out, "Enough! This is absurd. I will not allow a stranger to sully my name in front of everyone." And she advanced towards the resident, but was restrained by the guests themselves, who were trying to avoid an even bigger scandal. Ricardo, the millionaire, took a deep breath. His chest rose and fell with difficulty. He didn't understand why, but something inside him told him that the woman wasn't lying. It was irrational. It was unlikely. But there was truth in his eyes, and that disturbed him. While the bride spoke loudly, trying to defend herself, he barely heard her. His heart was already stuck in that wretched figure who dared to defy everything and everyone. In a deep voice, he finally spoke. "If what you say is true, what evidence do you have against her?" The hall erupted in murmurs. The guests leaned forward, hungry for the revelation. The bride turned pale. Her breath caught. The homeless woman closed her eyes for a second, as if gathering strength, and murmured evidence that no one here expected to see. The silence was heavy after the millionaire asked for proof. The hall fell into such a heavy silence that it seemed as if even the candles had stopped burning. Everyone was waiting for the answer. The pale bride took a few steps forward. Her voice faltered at first, but she soon resumed, now almost shouting, "This is a trap. Someone paid this woman to come here. You can't believe it, Ricardo. She's a liar." The guests murmured louder. Some looked at the bride with suspicion. Others to the groom, trying to guess what decision he would make. The bride turned to the guests, fake tears streaming down her eyes. "I've waited so long for this day, and now a stranger is trying to destroy my happiness. Can't you see? She wants to tear us apart." But his words no longer had the same strength. The mask of perfection was beginning to crack. Ricardo, motionless, watched. Every gesture, every look, every word of hers sounded rehearsed. Meanwhile, the wretched woman before him trembled, but her conviction remained intact. Someone in the audience muttered aloud, "What if she's telling the truth?" A second guest added, "Well, who would risk so much to invent a lie like that?" These words spread like wildfire. The doubt was planted, and what was laughter and mockery at first now became tension and anticipation. The homeless woman took a deep breath and took another step forward. Her eyes were teary, but her voice, even though trembling, was firm. "I didn't come here to destroy anything. I came to save. Because I know what this woman did. I saw it with my own eyes, and I have proof of it. My own eyes, and I have proof of it." She raised her hands, and there, between his dirty fingers, were crumpled, stained, but legible papers. The bride rushed forward furiously, but was restrained by two bridesmaids who held her by the arms. "She's lying," he screamed. "It's all fabricated. It's all fake. Don't believe her." But it was too late. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the papers, and the bridegroom, with trembling hands, reached out to receive them. The decisive moment when the papers changed hands, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The millionaire held them like they were dynamite. His fingers trembled. His eyes, brimming with tears, ran over each line. The silence was absolute. Not even the glasses clinked. Even the guests didn't dare cough. And then, his face paled. His eyes, once passionate, were now filled with shadow. The explosion of mystery. He held up the papers, facing his bride. His voice was low, but each syllable echoed like thunder. "Explain to this... The bride froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The fake tears dried, replaced by a look of real panic. The entire hall erupted in murmurs. "My God, she has been unmasked. What do these papers say?" The homeless woman, panting, looked at the millionaire and murmured, "This is just the beginning. You need to know the whole truth, and I will tell you." Ricardo held the papers in his hands. His fingers trembled. His mind was in a state of collapse. The resident's words echoed in her head, mixed with memories of a life that, for many there, it seemed impossible to believe. The guests murmured, waiting for an answer. But Ricardo said nothing. He just closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and immersed himself in his own memories. It was as if, in that instant, time had stopped, and his mind went back years, to a time when luxury, crystal and marble were nothing more than unattainable dreams. Ricardo was born in a poor neighborhood, with dirt streets and unplastered brick houses. His mother, a seamstress, spent sleepless nights to earn some money. His father, a bricklayer, worked from sunrise to sunset. But even so, the little he earned barely paid for food. He remembered the smell of stale bread, the times he slept without dinner, the sound of rain falling on the leaky roof. I remembered waking up early, walking miles to school, often on an empty stomach. And most of all, I remembered the feeling of being invisible, of being looked down upon for wearing worn-out clothes, of being humiliated by colleagues who had more since he was a child. Ricardo had a fire inside him. He could not accept that his life would end on that narrow, forgotten street. He promised himself that one day he would have it all: money, respect, power. He promised that no one would ever look down on him again. And with this promise engraved in his soul, he began his journey. At the age of 12, he sold candy at traffic lights. At 15, I carried boxes at the market. At 18, I was already working 3 jobs at the same time. Every coin saved was a step towards the dream. Every humiliation suffered was fuel to not give up. With a lot of effort, he got a scholarship to a college I studied at dawn. After working all day, he slept in libraries, ate whatever he could, but never complained because I knew I was building something bigger, and little by little, he began to stand out. A teacher noticed his talent and recommended him to a small company there. Ricardo showed not only intelligence, but also fierce determination, while others gave up in the face of difficulties. He persisted. That's how, little by little, it began to grow, first as an employee, then as a partner, until finally opening his own company. Years passed, and Ricardo multiplied his business, invested in real estate, technology, exports. He turned every opportunity into victory, and before he knew it, he was no longer just a rich man, he was a millionaire. The same boy who was starving now had mansions, luxury cars, million-dollar accounts in several banks. The same invisible boy was now respected, admired, feared, but despite all the power and all the fortune, there was one thing he could never buy: trust. There was always a shadow of doubt about who truly approached him out of love and who came out of interest. This insecurity followed him throughout his life. He dated, but was always disappointed. Friends drifted apart when the money ran out. Partners betrayed him in search of easy profit. The wound of his poor childhood still hurt. The fear of being deceived, of being used, had never completely disappeared, and now, in front of the homeless woman, that wound burned like never before because, in some inexplicable way, her words sounded familiar. She spoke with the same hard sincerity he himself had carried when he was just a dreaming boy. The first great betrayal. Ricardo remembered it as if it were yesterday. Still young, when he was starting to gain some space in the market, he believed in a partner who seemed promising. He was a charismatic man full of ideas, who spoke with conviction. Together they opened a small import company. For months, Ricardo worked tirelessly. He slept little, did calculations until dawn, negotiated with clients, made deliveries. Meanwhile, the partner always seemed calm, confident, smiling. Until one day, Ricardo found out the partner was embezzling money. He signed fake contracts in the company's name. He used Ricardo's work to enrich himself, hiding earnings and accounts he had never revealed. The discovery was like a punch in the stomach. Ricardo felt betrayed, deceived, used, and he swore to himself that he would never blindly trust anyone. Again, that experience changed him forever. In business, he became cold, calculating, meticulous. He learned to read between the lines, to perceive lies hidden in smiles. And it was this skill that helped him grow, avoiding new pitfalls. But in the heart, the story was different. The same man who didn't forgive mistakes and spreadsheets was still fragile in the face of a seductive gaze. The childhood wound, the fear of loneliness, the lack of true affection remained open, and it was precisely this weakness that made him vulnerable. Despite all his wealth, Ricardo felt incomplete. He had cars, mansions, trips, recognition. But when I returned home, I found only silence. The parties were full, but the soul remained empty. The dinners were plentiful, but the heart remained hungry. He realized that money could buy companionship, but it couldn't buy love. It brought applause, but it did not bring loyalty. And the richer he became, the harder it was to trust anyone. He asked himself, is this person with me because of who I am, or because of what I have? Meeting the bride, it was in this scenario of solitude that she appeared. Beautiful, young, charismatic. With a smile that seemed to light up any room, with sweet words, capable of softening even the hardest heart. She came into his life like a bomb. I said exactly what he wanted to hear. It offered the illusion of pure, selfless love. And Ricardo, tired of suspecting everyone, decided to believe. He decided to let his guard down. The calculating business millionaire has become a man in love, and for the first time in many years, he allowed himself to dream of a life together. But there were signs, small details he chose to ignore. Phrases from the bride that revealed a certain obsession with luxury looks, of disdain for simpler people. Increasingly, greater demands for the ceremony, for the gifts, for the contract. He could tell, but he convinced himself that it was just his insecurity. She loves me, he repeated to himself. I can't spoil everything with useless suspicions. And so, little by little, he gave himself up. Until the big day arrives, the day when, in front of everyone, a homeless woman would raise her voice to echo exactly what he most feared hearing. Ricardo stared at the woman before him. Dirty, miserable, rejected by everyone in that room, and yet there was something in her eyes that reminded him of himself. It was impossible to deny that courage. That audacity to speak in public even knowing it would be ridiculed was the same courage he had had in his youth, when he swore to himself that he would escape poverty. She was, in a way, the mirror of the boy he once was. That skinny kid who sold candy at traffic lights and heard mockery from people passing by in imported cars. That young man who walked through the city with torn shoes, dreaming of being someone. And now, ironically, he was on the other side. Wearing an Italian suit, surrounded by luxury, ready to ignore the only voice that dared to speak the truth inside. His mind was a battlefield. On one hand there was wounded pride, the shame of having your ceremony interrupted by someone who shouldn't even be there. On the other hand, instinct, the racing heart, the inner voice that said, she's not lying. Ricardo remembered the betrayal of his first partner. He remembered all the times he had been deceived by believing too much, and now, looking at his fiancée, he saw in her eyes that same gleam that he had once recognized in the traitor. The gleam of interest disguised as affection. But I could be wrong. What if she was just crazy? What if you were destroying your chance to finally be happy? Chance to finally be happy. The bride's despair as he delved into his memories. The bride kept talking. Ricardo, you can't listen to her. Look at me. I'm your future wife. I love you. She just wants to show off. She's making this up because she has nothing in her life. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes showed no pain, only fear. Fear of losing, fear of being unmasked. Ricardo realized this, and at that moment, doubt turned to distrust. The whole hall vibrated with low voices. Some demanded that security remove it. Others, curious, asked her to show the evidence right away. It was as if fate had divided the audience into two sides, and everyone was waiting to see which would win. And at the center of it all was him, the man who had enough power to make decisions for himself, but who now felt more vulnerable than ever. The resident took a deep breath and took another step. Even with tears in her eyes, her voice was firm. You don't know me. I have nothing to gain by being here. I know I'll be humiliated, maybe even arrested, but I couldn't keep quiet, because I saw something no one else saw, and if I kept quiet, your life would be ruined forever. Ricardo's heart beat faster. Those words sounded different. They weren't flattery. They weren't promises of love. They weren't rehearsed phrases. They were true, raw, painful, and he recognized the truth, because he had already borne it on his lips many times. Decision. Ricardo took a deep breath. He looked at his bride, who was crying and trembling. Then he turned to the resident, who could barely stand, and then, in the deep voice everyone there knew from business but which he rarely used in his personal life, he said, I'll listen to you. I want to hear what you have to say. The hall erupted in murmurs. Some cried out in indignation. Others applauded discreetly, and the bride, stunned, almost fell to the ground. The resident closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and clutched the papers in her trembling hands. So get ready, Ricardo, because what I'm about to reveal will change your life forever. The mask of perfection is. The hall buzzed with murmurs. The bride remained standing, trying to maintain the pose she had so carefully constructed. Her dress shimmered, her veil fell softly over her shoulders, and her expression tried to convey calm, but behind that controlled expression was panic. Because she knew that this woman no one there considered important, carried a truth that could destroy everything, and that terrified her. Past that, nobody knew. Most of the guests believed they knew a story. They only knew the polished version, told by herself, an elegant young woman raised in expensive schools, educated, charming, a woman who had won Ricardo's heart with her sweetness and intelligence. But that was just the surface. The truth was much darker. She hadn't grown up in mansions. He came from a family marked by silent scandals, hidden debts, and troubled relationships. Her father had disappeared when she was still a child, leaving only debts and broken promises. The status-obsessed mother had raised her daughter with a single rule: go up, whatever the cost. And she learned first steps in manipulation since she was a teenager. She used her beauty as a tool at school. He won over teachers with rehearsed smiles and classmates with false compliments. He learned to manipulate, to pretend, to shape his image according to what others wanted to see. It was never true. It was strategic. Every gesture was calculated, every word measured. And this skill has been refined over time. While other young women sought sincere friendships, she collected influential contacts where others saw human relationships. She saw steps. There were rumors. Hushed whispers about affairs with married men, about small scams disguised as business deals. Nothing ever proven. Everything always denied with convincing tears. When someone started to suspect something, she would walk away before the truth came out. I changed cities, appearances, history, reborn in every place, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty accounts. And so, carefully, she constructed the persona that now shone before everyone. The perfect woman. When he heard about Ricardo, he studied his life like someone studying a target. He read old reports, watched interviews, discovered their routines, their habits, their weaknesses. I heard he was lonely. I knew he wanted love, but was afraid of being deceived, and he saw a golden opportunity there. Planned the meeting. He created casual situations to cross his path. And when she finally met him, she already knew exactly what to say, what to wear, what to pretend to like. Ricardo believed because I wanted to believe. She didn't just want a husband. I wanted power. I wanted to inherit companies, accounts, properties. I wanted a surname that would open doors. And she was willing to do anything to get it to the world. It was a love story. For her, it was a calculated project, meticulously executed. And now, just minutes away from carrying out his plan, He saw everything threatened by a single woman, a woman who had nothing but carried the truth. The conquest plan. Nothing about her relationship with Ricardo was a coincidence. Every gesture, every look, every coincidence, everything was calculated with precision. She started showing up in the same places he frequented: discreet cafes, cultural events, art galleries. Researched your hobbies, your preferences, your habits. He learned his language before he even exchanged his first word. At first, he pretended to be disinterested. She appeared from afar, just far enough to be noticed, but never to seem desperate. She knew that men like Ricardo, too flattery and interest, were attracted to those who seemed to have no need for it, and it worked. It was at an art exhibition that he approached. She wore a simple but elegant dress, and was looking at a painting with a thoughtful expression. When he made a comment about the painting, she smiled lightly and responded intelligently, but without showing off her knowledge. Ricardo was delighted. She looked different from the women who usually surrounded him, and she knew exactly how to look like that. They went out for coffee, talked about books, travel, dreams. She listened more than she spoke, inclining her head gracefully, making him feel like every word of hers was precious. It was at that first meeting that he planted the idea that he valued the man behind the fortune, not the money itself. He believed in the following weeks, she became a constant presence. He sent short, affectionate messages. She showed up with small gestures of care, a cup of tea when he had a cold, a note of encouragement before an important meeting. Ricardo, who had spent years surrounded by cold and self-serving people, melted. She seemed exactly what he was looking for: sincere, caring, sweet. But there was a dark logic behind every act. It was all part of a strategy. It created emotional dependence. It made him feel special, understood, loved, so that I could no longer imagine life without her. The first sign some close friends noticed changes. They commented that she seemed to be in too much of a hurry to make herself indispensable. Who asked too many questions about his business. Who got irritated when he didn't get his full attention. But Ricardo ignored the warnings. He was enchanted, and his needs spoke louder than reason. One time, during dinner, she made a comment that made everyone uncomfortable. You're lucky to be his friends, but not everyone will be so lucky for long. She smiled then, as if it were just a joke, but the looks exchanged around the table said something else. There was something menacing in that sentence. The rush to get married within a few months. She began suggesting marriage, always in a light-hearted way, like someone dreaming about the future, but with disguised insistence. Just imagine, our travels, a house of our own. Wouldn't it be beautiful? Ricardo hesitated, but her smile dissolved any doubt. Until one day, when he was facing a period of extreme stress, she enveloped him with sweet words and convinced him. The proposal was made, and within days, the wedding began to be planned with unusual haste. Dates were set, contracts drawn up, invitations sent out. Everything too fast, so fast that no one had time to question. Behind the scenes, however, some cracks began to appear. Employees reported having tantrums when something didn't go her way. Once, a decorator left crying after being insulted for a minor detail. She alternated between charm and fury with disturbing ease, but with Ricardo, she continued to be the perfect woman. He didn't know, or pretended not to see, that behind the smile was a calculating mind, obsessed with power, the first whisper of the secret hand. It was during this period that something began to circulate behind the scenes. Rumors hushed up, whispers among employees, that she was in secret contact with someone from her past who made mysterious calls at night. Hidden, that there were documents with another name, kept in a locked folder. No one dared to confront her, but someone saw, someone who shouldn't have been around, but was. A woman who lived on the streets, invisible to everyone except the truth. On the streets, invisible to everyone except the truth. The invisible witness. As the guests celebrated the preparations, while the bride shone in the spotlight, a silent figure passed unnoticed outside. He slept under awnings, collected food scraps, and at night he warmed himself with crumpled newspapers. Nobody knew his name, nobody noticed her, but she saw everything. From the cold sidewalks, the homeless woman watched the expensive cars arrive, the servants rush by, the boxes of flowers and luxurious fabrics being unloaded. She overheard random conversations, loose phrases escaping from hurried mouths, and with the attentive gaze of someone who had already lost everything, he began to notice what no one else saw. The whispered conversations. It was on a rainy night that he heard it for the first time. The bride, hidden under the awning at the side of the hall, was talking on the phone. His voice was low but firm, and every word carried venom. Everything is ready. He doesn't suspect anything. Soon everything will be ours. The resident held her breath. The words hung in the air like invisible blades. The next day, he heard it again. The bride was arguing with someone on the phone, irritated. You had your share. I won't share anything later. When I have access to everything, you're out of my life. Understand? These phrases remained engraved in the woman's mind. She didn't know exactly what they meant, but she could recognize the tone of someone who was plotting something dark. Days later, while walking along the side of the building, he saw his fiancée with an unknown man, tall, in a dark suit. with a cold expression. She handed him a black folder, looking over her shoulder as if afraid of being seen. He quickly took it and left without saying a word. The resident hid behind a column. His heart was racing. There was something wrong, very wrong. In the days that followed, the woman continued to watch. And the more I saw, the more certain I became that this marriage hid something terrible. He started rummaging through the trash backstage at night. Found torn envelopes with fake names. Receipts of deposits into accounts that did not belong to Ricardo, copies of documents with the bride's photo, but another name. Her blood ran cold. She didn't understand all the details, but she understood the essentials. That woman was not who she said she was, and the man who believed he was about to meet the love of his life was walking straight into a trap. For a while, she thought about keeping quiet. No one would listen to her, no one would believe someone like her. But every time he saw the bride's triumphant smile and Ricardo's passionate eyes, he felt a tightness in his chest. She knew that look, the look of someone who believes they are safe, seconds before being betrayed. I had seen that look in the mirror years ago, before I lost everything. And that's when he made his decision. I would risk everything. I would enter that room, even if I was chased away, humiliated, maybe even arrested, but he would not allow another human being to have his life destroyed before his eyes. On the morning of the wedding, he got up before the sun. He cleaned his face in the cold water of the fountain in the square, combed his hair with his fingers and took a deep breath. The heart was beating like a drum. His hands were sweating, but his steps were firm. She knew that when she opened her mouth, the whole world would come crashing down. And yet, it was. Now, in the center of the room, in front of everyone, the homeless woman looks up and faces Ricardo with a courage that no one there understands. The bride watches her, fear hidden beneath fury. The guests hold their breath, and the woman says, with a trembling but sharp voice, "I know who she really is, and what she did before she became the homeless person that everyone looked down on. She had a name that now almost no one remembered, not even she herself dared say it out loud, because with it came memories that hurt more than the cold of the early mornings on the asphalt. Her name was Helena. One day, he had a simple house, an easy smile, and dreams too big for the small neighborhood where he was born. But life does not forgive those who dream too much without having anything to protect themselves with. Helena grew up in a humble but affectionate family. His father was a bus driver, his mother a lunch lady at a public school. They lived with little, but they lived with dignity, until tragedy struck. First, the father's illness, a poorly treated pneumonia that turned into a generalized infection. Then, the debts to pay for the medicines, and finally, death, which took with it the last trace of security she knew. The devastated mother fell into a deep depression, stopped working, stopped eating, stopped fighting. Months later, he also left, leaving Helena alone in the world at 19 years old. She tried. In truth, he got temporary jobs, rented a tiny room, and studied at night when he could. I wanted to be a nursing technician. I said I liked taking care of people, but the world always seemed 2 steps ahead of her, pushing her back. First, he lost his job, then the room. When he couldn't pay the rent, then the documents were stolen, along with the bag at a train station. And so it was, without a plan and without a roof, that he ended up on the streets. Literally, the first night was the worst. She slept huddled under an overpass, fear throbbing in her veins. She woke up at every noise, convinced that someone was going to hurt her. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into years. Helena learned the silent codes of the sidewalks. Share the bread when it appears. Never look too much into the eyes of passers-by. Knowing how to disappear before the police arrive. He learned to ignore the disgusted looks, the mocking laughter, the coins thrown to the ground as if they were not for a person, but for a hungry animal. The cold hurt. The hunger hurt, but what hurt her most were the words, "Tramp failed, dead weight." She came to believe them for a while. He thought he was worthless, that he no longer had a place in the world. But deep down, a small spark of dignity remained. A little bit of the young woman who dreamed of caring for people, of living a life with purpose. It was this spark that kept her from giving up, even when the whole world seemed to want her gone in recent months. Helena had found temporary shelter near the ballroom where the wedding was now taking place. He slept in a side canopy, where security guards rarely passed. And from there, I watched them, boxes of flowers arrive. I watched the expensive fabrics being unloaded. He watched the woman in the impeccable dress passing by with the air of a queen. Helena watched in silence, but the more he saw, the more an uncomfortable feeling grew in his chest, because he recognized that sparkle in the bride's eyes. It wasn't love, it was raw ambition, the same one that had once destroyed his father, exploited by greedy bosses who sucked every drop of life from him. One morning, while employees were unloading boxes of flowers, Helena hid behind a column on the side of the building. He watched in silence when he heard a piercing scream coming from inside the hall. Curious, she approached. Inside, the bride stood on a dais, trying on the luxurious dress. Before her, a middle-aged seamstress knelt, carefully adjusting the hem of her skirt. "Are you incompetent or just blind?" the bride shouted. The bar is crooked. Look, do you want me to become a laughingstock? The seamstress, her hands trembling, tried to explain that she had not yet finished the adjustment, but the bride didn't let him. He bent down, ripped a tape measure from her hands, and threw it on the floor. Get out of here before I fire you now. Helena saw tears stream down the seamstress's face as she gathered her things and hurried out, embarrassed, and it was at that moment that something inside her changed. The woman's charm, previously seen from afar, now revealed dark cracks. Perfection was nothing more than a veneer. Underneath was arrogance and contempt. After that day, Helena started paying more attention, and what he found was a trail of small cruelties that went unnoticed by the dazzled eyes of the rich. He saw the bride humiliate waiters for serving the drink at the wrong temperature. He saw her threaten to fire a decorator because the flower tones didn't match her aura. Saw a waiter leave in tears after being wrongly accused of stealing silverware, an accusation made simply because he didn't look at her in the respectful way she expected. Helena watched everything with a lump in her chest. I knew what it was like to be treated like I was invisible. I knew the bitter taste of being humiliated without being able to react. And I saw, in those cold eyes, that that woman loved no one. He loved only his own reflection. Over time, he began to notice something even more disturbing. The bride would often disappear from the salon for hours and return looking tense, checking her cell phone every few minutes. Sometimes she would speak on the phone in a low voice, looking around as if she feared being overheard. One night, Helena saw her leave through the side door and get into a dark car with tinted windows. The driver wasn't wearing a uniform, and the way she entered hurriedly head down didn't match the haughty demeanor she displayed to everyone. Intrigued, Helena began to pay attention to the trash in the room, and there he found the first traces. Torn papers with bank notes, printed sheets with names that were not Ricardo's, a list of numbered accounts in foreign banks. She didn't fully understand, but she knew it wasn't normal. I knew that woman was hiding something big. Others might have been blinded by the glitter of diamonds, but Helena had lived long enough to recognize the scent of lies. It was the same smell that hung over the streets where he grew up, the smell of false promises, of smiles that hid knives, and every fiber of his body screamed, she will destroy him. But who would believe her? Who would listen to a woman who slept on the floor and lived off scraps? The very idea seemed absurd. Still, she knew she had to try. The night of decision, Helena spent that night awake, huddled under her worn-out blanket. The rain beat against the marquee awning, running down in icy rivulets that splashed onto his legs. She was trembling not just from the cold, but from fear. His body begged him to stay where he was so that she could forget everything, so that she could let the world take its course and not get involved in the lives of rich people who would never lift a finger for someone like her. But the heart screamed louder because, even having lost almost everything, he still kept within himself a sense of justice that no misery could tear away. And she knew that if she remained silent, she would never forgive herself. She remembered her father, exhausted after long shifts, still finding the strength to smile at her. He remembered his mother, trying to hide her tiredness with soft songs before going to sleep. I remembered how everything had fallen apart, and how no one, absolutely no one, had reached out. Ricardo didn't know it, but his gaze full of confidence hurt her because she had already been like that. She blindly trusted people who only wanted to suck what she had, and when he woke up, he had nothing left. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing that same look die in his eyes. When the sky began to lighten, Helena got up. His body ached, but his resolve was firm. He walked to the fountain in the square and washed his face, rubbing it with his cold hands until the dirt came off. He combed his hair with his fingers, trying to tame the unruly strands. Then he arranged the blanket over his shoulders as if it were a coat. He looked at his own reflection. In the murky water he saw a tired face, furrowed by time and the street. But he also saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Courage. He left before the sun had fully risen. The streets were still empty, shrouded in a fine mist that covered the sidewalks like a veil. His footsteps echoed in the silence. Each step seemed to say, patch. 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 He carried the crumpled papers he had found in the trash. He held them as carefully as one holds relics. And in her heart, she carried the last spark of hope that someone would believe her when the first guests began to arrive. She was already there, hidden under the shade of an oak tree, watching the imported cars parade by, the jewels sparkle in the morning light. Each new laugh he heard from the bride was like a nail driving into his mind. If you don't do something now, it will be too late. His chest hurt, his hands were sweating, but his decision was sealed when the doors opened to welcome the bride. Helena approached. No one noticed his presence at first. He was invisible as he had always been to the world, but inside her, the invisible screamed. She took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and walking the crystal chandeliers reflected her tired figure as if mocking her boldness. The guests looked on, first with astonishment, then with indignation. But she didn't stop. He walked to the center of the room. He stopped, looked up at Ricardo, and decided to speak. Don't trust her. She's hiding something very terrible. Helena's voice echoed through the hall like thunder. The string quartet fell silent. The justice of the peace froze with his pen poised and Ricardo's heart seemed to stop for a moment. The whole in suspense. Helena's words still echoed. Don't trust her. She's hiding something very terrible. The silence that followed was almost solid. The guests were paralyzed, like wide-eyed porcelain statues. No one knew what to say, what to do, or even what to feel. The string quartet put their instruments aside. Even the candles seemed to burn slower. The bride stared at Helena with a tense smile, her fingers clenched around the bouquet, like claws ready to attack. Ricardo, in turn, it seemed like a different person. The passionate gleam had disappeared from his eyes, replaced by a shadow of doubt. This is an insult, an invasion. The bride screamed, her high-pitched voice cutting through the air. Someone get this woman out of here now. 2 security guards started to advance, but Ricardo raised his hand, his voice low but firm. Nobody moves. The command froze the whole. His authority, shaped by years of business and victories, still carried weight. The bride blinked in surprise, then tried to smile. Honey, you can't be taking this seriously. She's just a beggar. But the word hung in the air like poison. Some guests looked at each other, uncomfortable with the blatant contempt. Helena took a deep breath. He felt his legs tremble, his heart hammering in his chest, but he didn't back down. He lifted the crumpled papers in his trembling hands and said, I know I don't seem trustworthy, but what I discovered could save your life, Ricardo. And if you ignore me, you'll lose everything. The words made the whole tremble. She used his name and he used it with respect, not with flattery. Ricardo kept his eyes fixed on her. Continue. This is ridiculous. The bride cried. Are you going to let this woman, this stranger, ruin the most important day of our lives? She tried to get closer, but Ricardo took a step back, the first real crack in her perfect image. If you have nothing to hide, you don't need to fear what she has to say. His sentence fell like a blow. The bride's face went pale for a second, before she regained her composure. But Helena saw she sensed the fear. The first tests. Helena took 2 steps forward. For weeks, I watched the preparations for this wedding. I slept outside, under the marquee. I saw things no one else saw. The guests leaned in discreetly to listen. She held up one of the papers. I found this list in the backroom trash. It's a list of foreign bank accounts, with deposits made on exact dates, the same dates when sums disappeared from Ricardo's companies. A murmur ran through the hall like wind. Ricardo frowned, took the paper with trembling hands, and quickly scanned the lines. His shoulders tensed. The bride advanced. This is fake. Anyone can print anything. Helena didn't blink. Then explain this. The photos. She pulled out another crumpled paper and held it up. It was a blurry photograph, taken from a distance, showing the bride handing a black briefcase to a man in a dark suit on the sidewalk. I saw it with my own eyes. It was night. She snuck out and handed him this folder. The next day, another deposit was made into one of the accounts on the list. The hall erupted in murmurs of shock. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, this feels like a scam." Ricardo remained silent, but his jaw was set. Helena saw the conflict in his eyes. The siege closes. The murmurs turned into a tidal wave. Some whispered coup, others set up, but no one could tear their eyes away from the paper in Ricardo's hands. He held it like someone holding a mirror they don't want to look at. The bride, sensing the mood turning against her, changed tactics. She lowered her tone, moistening her eyes, and approached with measured steps. "Love," he said in a studied whisper, "look at me. You know me. I would never do anything to you. This woman wants to ruin our day." She placed a hand on his arm. Ricardo stared at her but didn't move. He didn't push her away, and that, in itself, was a shock. But he didn't give in either. "If there is nothing to hide," he repeated, his voice low, "then there is no reason to fear the truth." The room held its breath. The homeless woman, her hands still trembling, pulled out another crumpled document. "I found this 3 nights ago," Helena said, holding up 2 copies. "They're different IDs, same photo, different names. One is the bride's, the other, a name used on a rental contract in a remote neighborhood, a place I saw this woman enter twice, always late at night." Some guests frowned. One of the bridesmaids bit her lip, visibly nervous, perhaps remembering an incident she'd preferred to ignore. The bride stepped forward and lifted her chin. "What grotesque nonsense. This is a crime. You will be prosecuted. Lawsuits don't erase facts," Helena replied firmly, handing the paper to Ricardo. "Check it out for yourself." He picked up the copies, held them up to the light, compared photos, and cross-referenced dates. The air around him felt thin. A deep line formed between his eyebrows. "Where did you get this?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the paper. "In the trash backstage, in black bags from the disposal area, mixed in with wilted flowers and evidence of what she's trying to hide." A dry laugh escaped the bride, this time without the varnish of sweetness. "Trash is where you come from, isn't it? Finding rubbish and making up stories. That's what you do best." The comment cut through the air like a blade. Many looked away, embarrassed. Some, indignant. The blatant cruelty cracked the mask she insisted on wearing. A white-haired guest, a former advisor to Ricardo, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Perhaps we should at least check these dates against internal reports. No, the bride interrupted sharply, then quickly tried to soften the situation. I mean, this is a wedding, not an audit. We're not going to turn a sacred day into a circus because of an intruder. Circus was the word that fired up the audience, because, after all, the circus was already set up and not by Helena. The truth, slowly, began to pierce the veneer. Helena held up another piece of paper, this time folded with almost affectionate care. Here are the micro-deposit statements in sequence. In broken amounts, made from a shell company, they match the dates of meetings the bride had off the agenda. Look, small, regular deposits. And then, suddenly, a spike right after the folder was delivered. Ricardo turned the document over, crossing lines with the trained eyes of someone who sees hidden patterns. His breath caught. Who is the recipient? The man in the dark suit, Helena said. The same one from the photo. Can you recognize him if I describe him? Tall, thin, a faint scar on his chin, a nondescript watch on a leather strap. I know that profile, the counselor whispered from the side. Operator, intermediary. The bride tried to laugh, but it wouldn't come. She was left with a tremor. The attempt to turn the game around enough. He raised his voice. This evidence is garbage collected by someone who wants 15 minutes of fame. Ricardo, my love, we agreed. Nothing and no one would separate us. Look at me. I love you. I can't believe you're exposing me to this embarrassment. Helena did not back down. To love is not to hide. To love is not to use. To love is not to sell another's life in silent installments. The words hit the marble of the hall and echoed back. Some wiped away tears. Some, for the first time, saw the bride as a stranger among expensive flowers. You say you love me, Ricardo replied with astonishing calm, but you avoided signing the final prenup until yesterday. Why? The question was an arrow. The bride blinked, lost a beat. I just wanted to feel safe. You know how it is. Trust issues. No, he replied, now firmly. Trust does not fear transparency. Helena took a breath and continued, gathering her own courage. There are also messages. I couldn't print everything. He held up a sheet of paper with handwritten notes, but I copied down the bits I heard. When I have full access, you disappear. No sharing later. He doesn't suspect anything. They were said on the phone, right here, under the awning, on a rainy night. That's a lie. The bride exploded. I was at home. You forgot that rain betrays footsteps, Helena replied softly. The night watchman saw you. The flower truck driver saw you. There are invisible people watching what you think no one sees, because those who are invisible learn to see what others don't want them to. That sentence sent a tremor through the subterranean air. The room, which until then had seemed like a shocked audience, became a hall of mirrors. Each person, for a second, saw their own reflection, the one they chose not to see. The bride opened her arms theatrically enough. I refuse to be lynched by rumors and crumpled paper. Ricardo, decide. Either we continue and expel this woman, or it all ends here. Now. It was an all-or-nothing bet. A bluff from someone counting on other people's hesitation. But Ricardo, instead of answering, looked around slowly, like someone returning to their own home after a long absence, and did something simple. He took a deep breath, clenched his jaw, and returned the question. Why was there a folder with documents in your car the night of the rehearsal? The driver reported that he had to open the trunk to put the flowers in, and saw it. A black folder, locked, with an unnamed label. The color drained from her face. For a second, the whole game fell from her eyes, and in that crack, the truth fit. Are you listening to drivers now? She whispered venomously. I should have remembered that people like you don't forget where they came from. It was a miscalculated insult, because where it came from was precisely the force that, at that moment, kept him standing. People like me, he repeated, without raising his voice, know the difference between those who see people and those who use people. Silence. I also came from the bottom, and I've seen that hunger in their eyes. Not the hunger to live, the hunger to possess. The bride clutched the bouquet until the petals crushed. The sweet scent became cloying. Helena then took the missing step. You're not just trying to have a good marriage. You're signing a script of appropriation. The deposits, the folder, the identities, point to a next step. Access, transfer, disposal. The final verb fell with the weight of a verdict. Discard. Discard who? Someone gasped in the background. Someone gasped in the background. Helena did not deviate. Discarded. A silent thunder echoed through the hall. The word, so short, brought with it the outline of the abyss. Another piece. The ghost apartment. There's a lease with your other name, Helena said, looking at her fiancé. The apartment is 40 minutes from here. I received a delivery from you there by mistake yesterday morning. The label had the first name changed, but the last name remained the same, which rarely happens by chance. Inside the box was a portable safe and an envelope with numbers, the same ones on the list. You broke into my house, the bride snapped. I didn't break in. The doorman left it at the front desk. I just read what was on the outside, and I recognized the numbers when I was rummaging through the trash this morning. They repeat themselves. There are too many patterns for it to be coincidence. Patterns always tell stories. Ricardo closed his eyes for a second as if testing his own momentum. When he opened them, the fog was gone. By this point, the room was divided between disbelief and growing conviction. A godmother, once inflamed, now kept her head bowed. A godfather stared at the floor, his fists clenched. People who loved the glow began to recoil from the soot it released. The bride noticed. She turned to the audience. All of you, think. How many times have you envied what Ricardo and I have? Don't you see what this is? Envy. This woman wants your place in our lives. I don't want anywhere, Helena said, and it was the only time her voice sounded sweet. I just want to keep anyone from losing what I lost. This sentence opened up cracks. The empathy, until then contained, found its way out. Tell me your name, Ricardo asked suddenly. Helena hesitated for a moment, not out of shame, but because of the scar. Then she straightened her shoulders. My name is Helena. Helena, he repeated, as if etching a stone. You said this is just the beginning. What's left? She breathed, eyes moist and steady. It remains to be said what's inside the folder, and why it was urgent. It remains to be said why she needed the wedding. Now. The bride hurried. Enough. I'm not going. Go, Ricardo interrupted, sharply for the first time. You'll listen, and you'll answer. Helena held up the last piece of paper, the most crumpled, protected like a relic. This is a copy of a joint account access authorization, valid for 30 days from today. It only becomes fully valid with the marriage certificate attached. Without marriage, access is not granted. With marriage, it's immediate. The information flashed across the room. It made perfect sense. It explained the rush. It explained the nervousness. It explained the briefcase. It explained everything. Ricardo didn't speak. He didn't need to. His face spoke for him. The bride gasped for air, but found walls. That's common. Legal protection. He stammered. Protection from whom? Helena replied. From you, or from what you intend to take. The audience was no longer whispering. They were watching Helena put down the paper, looked around the room, and finally, stuck the stake in. There's something very terrible she's hiding. Isn't just betrayal. It's a plan to empty you inside and out and leave you with nothing, including the name you built. And there's more. Something that can be written down. Something she did. Before Reto Mitsu, a chill ran down everyone's spine. Before meeting you, the past she hid. Helena remained silent for a few seconds, letting the suspense build until it was almost unbearable. Then he spoke in a low voice, but firm as steel. Before meeting Ricardo, she had already done this with another man. A sound of astonishment ran through the hall like a sharp wind. The bride turned pale. Lies, she shouted, but her voice came out thin, trembling, almost a sob. Helena continued. His name was Augusto Mendez, a businessman from another city, lonely, widowed, wealthy. She approached him exactly as she had with Ricardo, charming, feigning purity, promising eternal love. The bridesmaids exchanged distressed glances. Some of the groomsmen half rose from their chairs in disbelief. In less than 6 months, Augusto signed a joint authorization to access the company's accounts. Helena continued. A few days after the wedding, he collapsed, hospitalized, isolated. While he struggled to survive, the accounts were emptied. The words echoed like hammer blows. Helena took a step forward, her eyes teary but determined. She disappeared. She changed her name. She sold their apartment, disappeared with their cars, their jewelry, everything. I've never heard of that man. The bride stammered, her eyes wide, searching for support that didn't come. But Helena held up another paper, crumpled, dirty, but still legible. This is a newspaper clipping I found among the other documents. News about the financial collapse of Augusto Mendez Company. And here, he showed a blurry enlargement, but clear enough to show her face in the background of an old wedding photo. She is, with a different name, but the same face. The hall exploded, muffled screams, hands covering mouths. That image broke the last thread of doubt that some still had. The mask shatters. It's a setup. The bride screamed, her voice high with pure desperation. Someone set this up. They're all against me. But no one moved. No one spoke, and that silence was crueler than any accusation, because there was no longer any charm in anyone's eyes. What was once fascination was now fear. Fear for Ricardo, fear of what she would still be capable of doing. The bride began to pace back and forth, lost like a caged animal. Crushed petals fell from her bouquet, marking the path to ruin. She tried one last time. Ricardo, please, look at me. This is all envy. You know who I am. You felt my love. He interrupted her. .com/cold. Now I know exactly who you are. The sentence was a mortal blow. Her knees went weak. The bouquet fell to the floor, scattering blood-red flowers across the marble. The tension that once vibrated has now transformed into something heavier, a silent sadness, a mourning for a love that never existed. Ricardo was still standing, but he seemed weighed down by years of disappointment compressed into seconds. Helena, for her part, was motionless, exhausted, as if each word spoken had torn a piece of her away, but firm. The perfect picture of marriage was crumbling before everyone, petal by petal, lie by lie. She looked up at Ricardo and said, without boasting, without rancor, just truth. I didn't come to destroy your love. I came to stop them from destroying you. And then he lowered his arms. letting the papers fall like ashes onto the polished floor. Ricardo closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, there was no more doubt. The decision was made. He took a deep breath, raised his voice and said, "This marriage is over." A muffled cry of astonishment echoed through the hall. The bride let out a hoarse sound, something between a sob and a roar, as the perfect world she had built with lies crumbled before everyone. The silence that cracked Ricardo's words still hung in the air, like a thunderclap that no one had had time to absorb. "This marriage is over." For an eternal second, the hall remained still. Not a sigh, not even the distant sound of the string quartet, which, embarrassed, had already lowered its instruments. All eyes were on him, of the man who, just minutes before, had seemed ready to give his heart away and now, standing like a wall, refused to give up even a shred of trust. The bride stood still, her face as white as the silk of her dress, the mouth is open but silent, the bouquet at her feet, the red petals crushed against the marble as if symbolizing the ruin of everything she had built. Then, as if the world had started spinning again, came the first sound, a surprised whisper from one of the bridesmaids. He cancelled. And that whisper lit a spark. Within seconds, the room was in turmoil, guests hurriedly rising, chairs scraping on the floor, murmurs rising like a shockwave. "I don't believe she deceived him. My God, what a scandal." The words clashed in the air like electric sparks. Cell phone cameras were discreetly raised by some of the more daring, trying to record the historic moment. The collapsing bride. The bride took one step forward, then another, as if she were learning to walk again. His chest heaved, his eyes filled with despair and fury. "No, no, Ricardo, don't do this to me." His voice came out in cracks, like glass cracking. He didn't answer, he just stared at her, and that look was enough to leave her in tatters. She fell to her knees, ignoring her wrinkled and dirty dress. "I love you," she cried, her voice hoarse, tears dripping down her makeup, which now smeared her face like melted mascara. "I did everything for us, everything for you." But the confession, instead of moving him, hardened him because he knew she wasn't crying for love, she was crying for the loss of the prize she took for granted. Some moved away discreetly, as if fleeing a fire. Others remained, trapped in the spectacle of collapse. Unable to look away, the elderly counselor who had previously defended her now shook, his head silently. A bridesmaid, who had previously laughed at the bride's eccentricities, was now crying, her eyes fixed on Helena. And Helena was motionless, shoulders hunched under the weight of courage that was finally running out. Her eyes were teary, but firm. There was no pride, no triumph, just relief. Just relief. When the commotion began to calm down, Ricardo spoke low, but with a firmness that made the entire room fall silent. "I built my life with effort. Every brick, every penny, every step was earned with work, sacrifice, and trust. But today, I realized that I almost gave everything to someone who doesn't know the value of any of it." The bride lifted her face, her eyes imploring. But he continued, "You didn't want to share my life. You wanted to possess it. And I will not be anyone's property." A shiver ran through the room. It was as if those words, kept hidden for a lifetime, had finally found their way out. The spark of fury. Ricardo's last words were still reverberating when the bride let out a short, almost animalistic sound. Her skin, which had gleamed in the chandeliers minutes before, now seemed taut, fragile, on the verge of breaking. She jerked to her feet, her fingers digging into the petal-depleted bouquet like claws, and cast the sharpest gaze in the room directly at Helena. "You," he said, with a breath of venom. "It was you who destroyed everything." She took 2 steps too fast, for the weight of the dress stumbled over the hem, regaining her balance with a fury that propelled her even further. The guests parted with a collective gasp. The music, long silent, now seemed like a sheepish ghost among the columns. "I will shut you up," he hissed. "The body that comes and goes." Helena didn't back down. She froze, not out of boldness, but out of exhaustion. She had given everything: voice, courage, breath, and now, faced with the coming blow, her body simply waited. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on Ricardo, as if to say, "You've already done my part." The bride raised her arm. It was the exact second that 2 things happened at once. A security guard, until then a shadow among shadows, advanced from the left flank. Ricardo's hand appeared in the air, open, short, and definitive, it seems. The security guard stopped the attack with silent precision, a firm forearm in the space between the 2 women, touching neither. The bride gritted her teeth. "Get out of my way," he spat, trying to get around the obstacle. "Nobody touches her." The voice came from Ricardo without raising his tone, and yet moving mountains. "Not now, not later." The first public defense there was a collective shudder, because it wasn't just a ban, it was apposite. Before the elite, the crystal, the rare flowers, he placed himself literally between fury and the invisible woman who had told the truth. "If you touch Helena, this matter will cease to be a scandal and become a crime," he added firmly, "and I will not hesitate to record every gesture, every threat." The name Helena repeated, planted. The word took shape. People who hadn't dared look at it before now regarded it with a mixture of respect and strangeness, as if discovering that the rock in the path was actually a lighthouse. The bride gave a short, cracked laugh, You've lost your mind. Are you really going to defend this ... person? Ricardo interrupted. She is a person, and today she was the only one here who had enough courage to say what you call impalatin. In fact, it is true the hall fell silent again, but it was no longer a silence of shock. It was a silence of positioning. The lineups began, silent and relentless. A godfather who had previously regretted breathing now crossed his arms at Ricardo's side. A godmother walked up to Helena and, without touching, stood closer as if offering a guard by their mere presence. The elderly counselor removed his glasses, cleaned them a gesture of time, and replaced them with grave slowness, approaching Ricardo with a simple wave. The bride noticed the change of tide and tried the old buoy. The audience, do you see? This is a lynching. I'm the victim, he tried, his voice rising and falling, searching for a frequency that no longer existed. This man is being manipulated. These people, he pointed broadly mistakenly, including half the room, have always wanted to see me fall. No one followed her. The echo returned empty. Victim didn't change your name, said someone in the background. Victim didn't run with a locked briefcase, said another. Further ahead, victim does not sign conditional access to marriage, completed the counselor. Now next to Ricardo, his voice low and clear. With each sentence, the bride's frame cracked a little more. She took a deep breath, her shoulders rigid, and bit back a response that never came. The perfect dress now weighed like wet armor. You owe me an apology, he said finally, staring at Ricardo as if trying to hypnotize him, for exposing me, for humiliating our love. You will regret this. There is no love where there is a plan of plunder, he replied unhurriedly, and no one has the right to an apology for being exposed. Some guests lowered their heads, not out of shame for him because they recognized themselves. For a moment, on the soft bed of omission, Ricardo turned slightly to Helena. The movement was small, but the whole room noticed it. Are you okay? He asked in a voice that wasn't that of a businessman, nor that of a betrayed man. It was that of a boy who had known the cold and learned to recognize when someone else was too. I am, she said. The truth, she wasn't. She was at her limit. But could handle bring water? Ricardo asked, and a waiter, the same one who had been humiliated days earlier for serving a glass. One level below appeared like a flash of humble lightning, offering a glass with both hands, as if handing over something sacred. Helena thanked him. The waiter, with a tiny gesture, nodded. His eyes moist, the elite realized Baluch had returned to the room. Seeing the scene dissolve without her, the bride sought a dramatic exit. She readjusted her veil, lifted her chin, and made as if to march down the aisle like a wronged queen. I don't need this, she announced loudly, trying to regain some control. Canceling as a favor. I have my dignity. I won't stay where I'm not respected. He took 2 steps and froze. Because to ordinary people, invisible guests at every party, the florist and the humiliated seamstress, stood side by side, near the door. They didn't block it. They didn't stare. They just ... existed in the line of passage. Their presence cut short any narrative of glory. It was as if the door to fame opened, at that moment. Onto the alley of memory. The bride swerved and ran head-to-head with the driver who had once heard her barked orders. He merely formally tipped his cap. His respect was no longer for her. There was no grand exit, only return corridors. The private event continues, Ricardo said, nodding to the security guards. But the staff document area is closed off. Now, no access or disposal, until audited. Record the movement, and call legal the word or settled things in the place where the powerful truly hold accounts the record. The stamp, the minutes. The bride spun on her heel, her eyes flashing. Are you going to sue me? He challenged, a smile trying to resurface. Good luck proving anything. Proving is work, the counselor replied calmly. Time and method. We've done more difficult things with smaller facts. Helena, silent, clutched the glass between her fingers. A part of her wanted to disappear. Another understood that staying was, at that moment, an act of protection, not of herself, but of Thedruethid had brought him there. A silver-haired lady, a well-known philanthropist and a longtime friend of Ricardo's family, approached bride with a tenderness that was not conniving. My daughter, the dignity you claim begins with acknowledging what you did. Leave here without causing any more damage. What can be saved will be saved in the silence of justice. For a second, the bride's eyes softened. There, perhaps, was the last bridge. But bridges require steps, and steps require will. I don't owe anyone anything, she whispered harshly, breaking the offer. The lady walked away slowly, uncrossed. Bridges become reminders of the journey. Ricardo returned to the center of the room. He didn't speak. Deliberated. To my guests. I thank you for your presence. Those who wish to leave are free. Those who prefer to wait will be welcomed with respect. There will be no celebration. There will be truth. And I will work to restore all that was lost, and all that was almost lost. He looked at the buffet staff. Redirect the food. Nothing will be wasted today. It will be sent to those in need. There is a shelter nearby. His eyes returned, for a moment, to Helena. May what was prepared for vanity serve today for life. The gesture reshaped the evening. The elite found themselves invited to a different kind of ceremony at the first honest, One that day. The bride let out a soundless laugh, biting her own pride. Charity to clear one's conscience. How noble. Charity cleans nothing, Richard replied, without turning his face to stains, and the whole understood that the power had changed places. The phone call from rock bottom. The bride took 2 steps back, seeking shade between columns and curtains, as if searching for a smaller stage to repeat the act. Her cell phone emerged from her sleeve, a practiced furtive gesture. She turned her face away, covering her mouth with her crumpled veil. Come now, she whispered quickly, her voice cracking. Now plan B. The briefcase. No, not through the main entrance. The service corridor. I'll pay double. Bring the black car, and delete the messages. The call had barely ended when a hand rested on the curtain, fabric not rude, just inevitable. The security guard, who had always been there, invisible as the pillars, leaned in close enough for her to understand. The service perimeter is cordoned off, ma'am. Cameras on. Exits recorded. She bit her lip until the taste of iron rose to her tongue. You don't know who you're dealing with. I know what I'm dealing with, he replied. Neutrally. Procedures are the way truth arms itself with patience. Among the staff, discreet radios whispered coordinates. The Mortar D, once anxious about the etiquette of glasses, now operated like a conductor of another concert. Trays redirected to the shelter, seals checked, lists stamped. The florist and the seamstress, who remained near the exit, were instructed by a security guard to accompany an assistant to the disposal room, not to clean, but to preserve. Nothing would come out of there without registration. Drawers, the counselor asked, approaching the stage manager. Photographed, sealed, listed. The coordinator held up a notepad. This isn't a party anymore. It's become minutes. Parties end when the letterhead comes in. Lawyers crossed. The room was steps that didn't ask permission. They weren't men of the stage. They were men offline, those that assigned with the weight of time. They greeted Ricardo, exchanged a few words with the counselor, and received from Helena with the care of a relic, the stack of crumpled papers. Are they original? Asked the younger lawyer, her eyes alert. They're what the street has, Helena replied, without arrogance or apology, and what the trash tried to hide. The lawyer nodded. Proof arises from context. The documents were given plastic covers, numbering, and order. Chaos was transformed, page by page, into a verifiable narrative. Let's cross-check dates with bank transactions, the senior lawyer told Ricardo, and preserve the staff devices. We need backups of the internal cameras today. Already requested, the coordinator informed. Copies in a temporary safe. The bride laughed, a short sound that no longer found an audience. You think you can catch me with trash paper and a blurry photo? You don't know how to play. It's not a game, the lawyer said, without raising her voice. It is trial. Realizing that the tide would not return, the bride tried one last composition. She adjusted her veil, lifted her chin, and walked back to the center, simulating a calm she did not possess. I'm withdrawing, for the sake of propriety, he announced, as if granting grace. But know this doesn't end here. I'll take each of you with me. A lawsuit for defamation, for embarrassment, for attempted qualified fraud. The counselor interrupted for the first time, without changing his tone. I reiterate, time and method. I suggest you avoid performative self-incrimination. She wiped away her smile. Her face was as smooth as porcelain before the fall. Ricardo defines the end. Ricardo took a deep breath. The impeccable suit now looked like the uniform of a new job. The event ends here, he told the Motor D. All contracts for this day are subject to audit. No additional payments are made without review. Those who worked receive the payment. Those who try to use it are held accountable. He turned to Helena. I want you to leave protected, he stated, without emphasis, as if determining that gravity should work. I'll take you to the side door, with an escort. No need, she began, instinctively, accustomed to refusing everything. It does, he corrected simply. Today, yes. The waiter brought a shawl left by a guest. He handed it to Helena without any fanfare. She accepted. Small gestures are bridges. They walked, not in procession, not in triumph. In clarity. Ricardo, Helena, the counselor, the lawyer, 2 discreet security guards, silent freak. The room parted not out of fear, but out of silent agreement with reality. As they passed the quartet, a violinist raised his bow, a fraction an ancient reflex of someone who offers music to any pain. He didn't play. Silence, in that moment, was the right song. Near the door, the silver-haired lady waited for them. She held Helena's hands in hers. You did what many of us didn't have the courage to do, she said. Thank you. The most difficult word of the elite. Thanks found the right address. Helena just nodded. Her eyes said the rest. In the service corridor, cold lights. 2 red cameras blinked, recording guaranteed. A security guard pointed to the room where boxes were already sealed, numbered plastic, and folders organized on a table. The lawyer photographed the set, pointed the lens at the wall clock, recorded the time, date, and sequence. She documented the documentation. The chain of custody began there, precise, without poetry, and for that very reason. Strong. The car is ready. Another security guard radioed. Side door, east exit, no press. The word press swarmed through the air like an inevitable mosquito. Of course, there were curious onlookers on the street. Rumors travel faster than people. But the eastern corridor opened onto a peaceful alley, a shaded area between trees where cars passed anonymously. Ricardo stopped in front of the metal bar. He placed his hand on it, but didn't open it. He looked at Helena with the gentleness of someone who recognizes the desert in another's eyes. "Are you safe?" he asked again. "Today I went," she replied. "And it was true. Tomorrow," the lawyer said, with welcoming practicality, "we'll go to the registry office and the police station, report the incident, obtain protective measures, formalize the evidence. No rush, no spectacle." Methodically, Helena nodded. The counselor added, "And as for you," he turned to Ricardo, "the company isn't bleeding. The announced bleeding is half the cure. Let's take care of the rest." "We will," he said. And the word he said sounded like something he hadn't actually said in years. The last look before leaving, Ricardo glanced back at the ballroom along corridor, a vanishing point, figures rearranging themselves. The bride was nowhere in sight. Her absence, inexplicably, weighed more heavily than her presence. It was the emptiness after the storm, that silence that leaves the ear attentive. "She won't accept it," the security guard said, in a tone that wasn't advice. It was meteorology. "The clock accepts it for her," the counselor replied, "because time organizes what vanity messes up." Ricardo opened the door. Outside air, honest temperature. Helena tightened her shawl around her shoulders and crossed the line. She wouldn't run away, followed. The car glided down the side street. No horns, no flashing lights. In the back seat, Helena took a deep breath, relearning the idea of a soft seat. The lawyer typed notes on an electronic pad. The counselor looked out at the city as if counting light. Ricardo, for a second, let his head fall back against the headrest and closed his eyes. In the dining room, the Motor D was coordinating the delivery of trays to the shelter. The waiter at the water glass wiped his eyes with a towel and smiled to himself, as if he were keeping a good secret. The silver-haired lady picked up 2 intact flowers from the floor and placed them in a small vase. "Everything that can bloom." Bloomed. In the opposite wing, the bride opened a forbidden door, finding only another door, this time locked. She prowled, called, hung up. Plan B didn't come. Plan C didn't either. Her alphabet, for hours, would end there. At the bend in the alley, the lawyer's phone vibrated. She read it and looked up. It arrived. The first bank return. The numbers matched the dates Helena wrote down. And there's a repeat recipient, the man with the scar. Ricardo opened his eyes. Helena straightened her body, as if hearing her own heart return to its proper place. "So, tomorrow," said the counselor, "it won't just be word against word. It will be word with proof." The car took the avenue. The city wakes up. The morning sun streamed in through the cracks in the car, casting golden streaks across the silent faces. Helena watched the street go by with sunken but lively eyes. The city looked different, not because it had changed, but because for the first time she walked its avenues as someone who mattered. On the side, the lawyer typed non-stop. The counselor read in silence, with his glasses perched on the tip of his nose. Ricardo quietly looked out the window, as if he were trying to decipher the world that began after the end. The traffic lights flashed. Pedestrians crossed the lanes, but nothing seemed real, until the facade of the police station appeared in front of them, a sober building, with straight lines, without chandeliers or flowers, the opposite of the whole. There were no mirrors there, only records. The car stopped at the curb. 2 police officers were waiting at the side entrance, having been warned in advance by the lawyers to avoid any disturbances. No press, no flashes. The truth didn't need spectacle now, it needed protocol. Helena hesitated for a moment before opening the door. It wasn't fear of what was to come, but the shadow of the past weighing on his legs. The street still whispered that she belonged nowhere, but this time, someone held the door for her. "Ricardo, let's go together," he said simply. She got off. "Let's go together," he said simply. She got off. The morning air was cool, clean, different from the air in the hall, which seemed saturated with lies. Inside the police station, the environment was functional. Counters, folders, old computers. The lawyer presented the documents to the clerk, who received them with a professional expression, but his eyes widened slightly when he saw the pile. "We'll need to open a formal inquiry," he said, calling the police chief in charge. Within minutes, a meeting room was improvised for the initial hearings, recording on clock marking the time. Everything registered. Dated initial. Helena told.com/linear. Firm. From the first suspicions, the papers in the trash, the whispered conversations, the delivery of the folder. He did not hide his fears, nor the fact that he had slept on the streets. "I had nothing," she said, her eyes downcast, but her voice clear. "Only the certainty that if I kept quiet, he would lose everything." The police chief paused, evaluating each word with the eyes of someone who had heard all kinds of stories and knew how to recognize when one wasn't a fabrication. "You did the right thing," he said dryly, but with sincere respect. "And now we're going to do it right." Meanwhile, across town, the bride was in a hotel room, wrapped in a white robe-like armor. The cell phone vibrated non-stop. Messages from friends. It's on every website. Gossip magazine notifications. Millionaire scandal. Wedding interrupted live. A video of the moment. Ricardo said this marriage is over has already racked up millions of views. She paced back and forth, throwing the phone onto the bed and picking it up again, trying to control a fire with her bare hands. He called an old contact, a man with a scar on his chin. Calls declined. Then he called another one. I need you to delete everything. Photos, documents, accounts. Now too late, replied the hoarse voice on the other end. It's already in their hands, and if I try to move it, I'll fall with it. The call dropped. The silence in the room weighed more heavily than the marble in the hall. Back at the police station, the delegate concluded the hearing and signed the opening of the investigation. We'll contact the Financial Crimes Unit. If the bank details are confirmed, we'll immediately freeze her assets until the investigation is complete. Ricardo just nodded. It didn't feel like revenge. It looked like Sumi arrogant in control of one's own story. The counselor, who had barely spoken until then, adjusted his glasses and said, Today, what was theater ends, what is memory begins. And no one disagreed. The experts were hours later. The documents were already in an air-conditioned room in the Financial Crimes Unit. Cold lights, latex gloves, magnifying glasses, digital analysis computers. The chaos of crumpled papers that Helena had collected from the sidewalks was now being treated like rare jewels. An expert ran the scanner over the papers, capturing microfragments of ink. Another compared signatures with the files in the Central Registry Office. Each sheet was numbered, photographed, and sealed. The accounts exist, the lead expert said, her voice firm and emotionless, and the deposits matched the dates the witness described. And the recipient? Asked the lawyer. Same numbers from an old contract linked to a certain Mr. M. No valid CPF used a forged document. The counselor adjusted his glasses, a rare glint of indignation in his eyes. The man with the scar. The expert nodded. We will request the lifting of banking and tax secrecy, but this is already sufficient for an emergency freeze. Meanwhile, outside, the silence was beginning to crack. Even without press conferences, someone had filmed Helena leaving the police station alongside Ricardo. The video was short, him opening the car door for her, nothing more, but it was enough. Websites began publishing hasty headlines. Scandal, businessman's fiancée is accused of fraud at the altar. Man cancels wedding minutes before ceremony. Homeless woman saves millionaire from scam. Social media was exploding. Some called her a heroine, others a fraud, but no one remained neutral. Helena, without knowing, became a symbol even without wanting to be. The bride, in her hotel room, watched the avalanche on her cell phone. He changed his clothes 3 times, trying to look invisible. Tried to book plane tickets under fake names or blocked. Tried to access secret accounts, invalid passwords. Tried to call the man with the scar, non-existent number. He went to reception to ask for a car, but a plainclothes police officer was waiting discreetly in the lobby. She faked a smile, stepped back, and climbed back up. The world, which once bowed, now closed the doors before she rang. Late in the afternoon, Ricardo was in his office. The press gathered outside the building, cameras trained like light cannons. He didn't want the spotlight, but he knew that prolonged silence would be interpreted as fear, and he was no longer afraid. The press officer approached. 1 sentence. Just one. That's enough. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and walked into the lobby. Flashes went off. Reporters shouted. Microphones raised. He raised his hand and said, with the calm of someone who has been through hell and back, Today I didn't lose a wedding. I gained my freedom. Silence for a second, then chaos. The cameras wanted more, but he had already turned his back, and that one sentence, dry, short, unshakable, was headline news within minutes. The summons in the early evening. 2 bailiffs arrived discreetly at the hotel where the bride was staying. There were no cameras, no journalists, just the blunt weight of the law knocking at the door. She opened it with a pale face, wrapped in a silk dress that seemed to barely fit her new reality. One of the officers held up the manila envelope and said in a neutral voice, Madam, you are officially summoned to appear and give testimony. That's absurd, she whispered, trying to laugh, but her voice came out hoarse. Please sign for receipt. The pen trembled in his hand. Each letter of his own name seemed to scratch the paper. When the officers had left, she closed the door slowly and slid her back across the wood until she sat on the cold floor. No carpet or flowers. No music. The fall is always silent. Meanwhile, outside, the world reacted. Ricardo's phrase, today I didn't lose a wedding, I gained my freedom, had become the sound of the day. It was in the headlines, on makeshift t-shirts, in memes, in short videos that it spread like wildfire. Talk shows commented on the scandal and real time columnists wrote about the courage to break the cycle of emotional manipulation. Others analyzed the legal implications of the case, calling it the wedding coup of the century, and Helena's name, previously not, now appeared with unexpected force. Homeless woman prevents millionaire from losing everything. The invisible woman who saw what no one else saw. Some extolled her as a heroine, others doubted her, questioning her intentions. But either way, she was no longer invisible. In the office, Ricardo's advisor showed Helena one of the headlines. She blinked, confused. "I don't want fame," he said. "It's not fame," the advisor replied kindly. "It's recognition. It's different." Helena didn't smile, but his tired eyes became moist. For years, she had existed as a shadow now. For the first time, the world admitted that she had a name. Ricardo approached, his voice low and sincere. "You didn't just save what I have. You saved what I am." She didn't answer, but her silence carried more truth than any speech. Shortly after, the lawyer's phone, vibrated. She answered, listened, took notes and hung up. Then he looked up at the group gathered in the room. "The preliminary hearing has been scheduled." The air seemed to hold its breath. 2 days, he continued. She and Ricardo will be heard face to face. Witnesses, experts, records, everything official. The press will have limited access, but they will be there. Helena clasped her hands on her knees. Ricardo just nodded. There was no fear, had determination. "It's time to put an end to this," he said. Outside, the whole city seemed to be waiting. The news spread across light panels, on cell phone screens, in street corner whispers. Everyone wanted to see the confrontation. Everyone wanted to know how far the lie had gone and how far the truth would go. And in the silence of the room, Helena closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath and whispered just to herself, "Now, they will listen." The city in suspense. 2 days later, the city seemed suspended in air. There was no music in the streets, just the hum of live broadcasts. Electronic panels displayed countdowns. Reporters crowded in front of the central forum like birds, waiting for blood. Helena watched everything through the window of the dark car that was taking her. Cold hands on her lap, heart racing. "I wasn't afraid of losing. I was afraid that no one would listen. Fear that, even with everything, the lie would be more seductive than the truth." On the other side, Ricardo stared straight ahead, his jaw set. He didn't seem nervous, he seemed decided. His dark suit was no longer a symbol of ostentation. It was armor today. "I didn't come to negotiate. He came to win." The car stopped. In front of the imposing building, security guards cleared the way. Flashes cracked like thunder, but Helena kept her chin up, not out of pride, but out of dignity. When they walked through the glass doors, the noise stayed outside. Inside, there were no shouts or applause, just footsteps, stamps, and clocks. Truth, thought Helena, always walks in silence. They were taken to the courtroom reserved for high-profile cases. Their microphones were positioned, cameras authorized only for official and silent broadcast. Across the room, the bride was already seated. She looked smaller. Her face was haggard, her hair hastily tied up, her light blazer over her dark dress. There were no diamonds, no veil, no bouquet, just a hard expression of someone who fought harder to collapse a thorn to win. When her eyes met Ricardo's, there was no spark, just emptiness. They didn't know each other anymore. Maybe they had never really met. The defense attorney whispered something in her ear, but she didn't respond. Mouth closed, fists clenched on the table, as if he was still trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through his fingers. The judge entered. He struck the hammer once, and the sound echoed like suppressed thunder. The room rose in respect. Then he sat in absolute silence. "We have begun the preliminary hearing for case number 7243/25, the judge said. "Charge, attempted fraud by inducing marriage under false pretenses and collusion with third parties." The voice was neutral, but each word sounded like a stone falling. "The parties, witnesses, and experts will be heard. The entire session will be recorded." Helena felt her stomach churn, not out of fear of losing, but because of the gravity of what was about to happen. There the truth would cease to be a whisper, and would become a sentence. "Mr. Ricardo Menezes," said the judge, "can you confirm that you were about to marry the defendant and canceled the ceremony at the time of the celebration due to suspicion of fraud?" Ricardo looked up. The entire room held its breath. "I confirm," he replied firmly, his voice deep and clear. "And why did you make that decision?" He took a deep breath. "Because, thanks to the courage of a witness, I discovered that the woman who claimed to love me was, in fact, trying to take what I had spent my entire life building." The murmur of the audience was drowned out by the judge's gavel, but the phrase had already entered history. "The bride's defense, Madam Defendant," the judge said, turning his gaze to her. "Do you deny the charges?" She lifted her chin, her voice contained but with a hint of the old arrogance. I deny it. This is all nothing more than a huge misunderstanding, fueled by rumors and envy." "Be objective," the judge warned. "Did you use false names and maintain undeclared accounts?" "I used a different surname for personal security reasons. I'm a public figure. I have a right to privacy. As for the accounts, they're not mine. They were created by people connected to Ricardo's team. I simply trusted whoever was supposed to manage the financial matters." "Do you have any documents to prove this allegation?" the judge asked. She hesitated for a moment. It was enough for the silence to become an invisible verdict. "Not yet," she murmured, and the words sounded hollow even to herself. The bride's defense rushed in. Your Honor, my client is being persecuted. This witness Helena doesn't even have a permanent residence, and there's no valid proof of legal identity. We can't give credibility to someone who lived on the streets. The judge looked up, stern. Credibility isn't measured by address, Doctor. It's measured by consistency, evidence, and the courage to testify under oath. The room vibrated in silence. The defense fell silent. The bride's previously haughty expression began to crumble. Call witness Helena, announced the judge. She stood up slowly. The wooden bench seemed further away than any street I had ever crossed, but his steps were firm. He swore to tell the truth. Her voice, when it came, was not loud but clear, sharp. Sure, I didn't want to be here, but I had to, because if I'd kept quiet, he would have lost everything, she said, gently pointing at Ricardo. And what made me speak wasn't hate, it was justice. She told everything. From the bride's first scream at the staff to the whispered conversations on the phone, the night outings, the delivery of the black folder, the torn papers in the trash. Toddy spoke unhurriedly, without flourishes. Each sentence fell like a clean stone onto the table. The stenographers could barely keep up when he finished. The judge leaned forward slightly, his elbows on the table. Did you know that you could be ignored, ridiculed, even sued for slander? I knew, Helena replied. But I also knew that if I didn't say anything, he would be destroyed, and I couldn't live with that. Call the forensic team, ordered the judge. Two experts entered with numbered folders and portable screens. The silence in the room became dense. To confirm the authenticity of 87 pages of documents collected by the witness, said the lead expert. They contain international bank records and false contracts that used identification with the defendant's photo, but under different names. A large screen displayed side by side the photo of the bride on a fake passport and her official image, same face, different names. In addition, continued the expert, we located the transfer of funds from company account to accounts associated with a man identified as Mr. M, the same individual. It appears in photos receiving a folder from the defendant. The images were displayed. The room held its breath. The bride clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white, but he didn't say anything. The experts closed the exhibition. The room seemed to be forcibly filled with air. The bride's defense rose with an almost desperate impetus. Your Honor, we cannot accept this evidence. It was obtained by someone with no legal training, without a warrant. The judge raised his hand, interrupting with cutting calm. They were voluntarily handed over by a bona fide witness. Legality is preserved because the official expert confirmed their authenticity and the chain of custody was established, but she took them out of the trash. The lawyer insisted. Exactly, the judge retorted. Trash has no confidentiality protection. The blow was dry. The defense attorney sank into his chair, his shoulders heavy, his gaze lost. I knew the legal fight was practically lost. The bride had no choice but to try to survive the shipwreck. Would you like to add anything? The judge asked, as a formality. The bride slowly got up. His hands were shaking. For a moment, it seemed like he would confess. Tearful eyes, parted lips. But then came the poison. This is a conspiracy, she whispered, her voice trembling and hype. All of you want to destroy me because I'm stronger, prettier, smarter than this bunch of mediocre people who surrounded me. A murmur of astonishment ran through the room. Her mask didn't fall, exploded. The judge banged the gavel, the dry sound cutting through the outbreak like a razor. It just is. She fell silent, her chest heaving. Ricardo remained impassive, his eyes steady, as if he were finally looking directly at the shadow that had previously been hidden behind a smile. The judge organized the papers in front of him. With slow, surgical gestures, the room fell silent. Each breath felt like a stifled scream. In view of the robustness of the evidence presented, and considering the risk of dissipation of assets and destruction of evidence, this court determines. He paused. The pen glided steadily. Immediate freezing of all movable and immovable property registered in the defendant's name. Temporary suspension of passport and ban on leaving the city. Opening of criminal proceedings for attempted qualified asset fraud, ideological falsehood, and criminal association. A muffled sound of shock escaped the audience. The defense tried to protest, but the judge looked uphand. The silence returned like a tide. The decision is provisional, but effective from this moment. The hammer came down. The sentence fell like a stone into the bottom of a well. The bride stood still. His eyes were fixed on nothing, as if the world had faded away around him. The shoulders that were once erect now hunched like broken columns. No one came near. Neither did his former allies, not even his lawyers, who collected files in a hurry and with shame. She didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't apologize. It just stood there, a monument to emptiness. Helena, on the other side, closed her eyes. He didn't smile, but the weight he had been carrying, since the day he decided to enter that golden hall, finally began to lift. The truth did not bring applause, it brought silence. That silence was all she needed. Ricardo inclined his head slightly towards her. There was no triumph in his gaze, only gratitude. The judge announced the closure of the preliminary hearing. The next sessions will determine the final sentence, he said. Until then, the defendant remains under surveillance. He banged the gavel one last time. Outside, journalists surged forward. Microphones raised like swords. The news would spread around the world in minutes. Ricardo and Helena left the court together, protected by security. When they crossed the threshold, the sun blinded them for a moment and seemed to announce a new world, which began right there. Iron dawn. The city awoke to a concrete tone. There was none of the electric anxiety of the first day, nor the spectacle of flashes. There was wariness and grave anticipation. The forum seemed taller than usual, as if the architecture also demanded posture. Helena wore a simple blouse under a borrowed coat, tied up her hair, and breathed in front of the small mirror in the anteroom. In the glass, restored in fragments, was the face of someone who had spent nights in the open air and still kept the flame alive. Beside her, Ricardo adjusted his tie unhurriedly. It was no longer the armor of the rich. It was the uniform of a man who chose not to hide. The lawyer organized the folders, bound evidence, expert opinions, petitions with recent postmarks. The counselor penciled diary, and Silence wrote down what time required. Deadlines, refunds, extended freezing requests. Today is not the end, the lawyer said softly. It's the beginning of what's next. No one disagreed. Beginning of what's next. No one disagreed. The judge entered with the same economy of gestures. He banged his gavel once. The audience gasped in unison. We will continue the investigation. After hearing the expert opinion, we will make our final arguments. Then, we will issue a sentence. The defendant entered a few minutes later. Dark blazer, hair tied tightly, skin too pale under the white lights. In her eyes she had a map of all the closed routes. She sat down, placed her hands on the table, and then pulled them away, as if afraid to touch it and freeze there forever. The judge signaled. The prosecution rose. The prosecutor's voice wasn't theatrical. It was a chisel, Your Honor. The materiality is proven. Parallel identities, offshore accounts, a timeline that coincides with attempts to gain conditional access to the marriage. Authorship is also proven. Images, testimonies, metadata. The intent is crystal clear. There is no room for reasonable doubt. The defense asked to speak. They came with periphrases, folds, hypotheses. They stumbled upon the hard detail of the clock. Closing arguments in 15 minutes, said the judge. And for the first time, time did not run to cover up. It ran to reveal. Prosecutor's Office 1005. We request conviction for attempted qualified property fraud, fraudulent misrepresentation, and criminal association. We also request a custodial sentence in a closed initial regime, minimum damages, continued asset freeze, and a ban on operating in companies for a specified period. Defense 1018. My client acted out of fear. She was manipulated. She wasn't seeking to take advantage of the situation. She was seeking security in an unequal relationship. We request a subsidiary acquittal or, at least, a downgrade to less serious offenses, with an alternative sentence. The judge took notes without blinking. Finally, he looked up. Before sentencing, I will hear the victim and the witness. Ricardo stood up. He didn't speak. I asked for justice and time. Time to repair what was almost lost. And justice so that no one believes that love is a plunder contract. He sat down. Helena stood up. She didn't cry. I didn't come here to defeat anyone. I came so they could stop defeating Silence. That's all. He sat down. The judge took a breath. The clock on the wall creaked discreetly, like old wood. The sentence, considering the body of evidence, the coherence of the reports, the robustness of the expert evidence, and the chain of custody, I consider it appropriate the prosecution. I convict the defendant of the crimes of attempted qualified financial fraud, fraudulent misrepresentation, and criminal association. The defendant closed her eyes, as if she were receiving a cold wind in her face. Pity, 9 years and 4 months of imprisonment. Initial closed regime more proportional to the potential damage. Minimal repair to the victim's companies, to be determined in liquidation. Exercise corporate administration, for 8 years. Lock maintenance of goods and prohibition of leaving the district. The hammer came down once. The sound pierced nerves. The competent courts for enforcement and the financial oversight agencies for residual tracking are hereby notified. I order the submission of documents for investigation of the co-author identified as Mr. M and any potential participants. The scarred man's name flew across the room like a steel bird. There was nowhere for it to land. The defense tried to rise. The judge added, without ferocity, firmly, appeal and freedom. No, there is a risk of escape and obstruction. Custody is maintained. Silence. And then the sound of invisible shackles that only those who have made mistakes hear. 2 police officers approached, a light hand on her forearm. Protocol. The defendant looked around, not looking for salvation, but for a corner of the world that was still hers. There was none. He tried to find something to hold on to in Ricardo's face. Anger, resentment, hatred. He found on live sense if opposite of love is not hate. It is the void where nothing sticks. He turned to Helena, perhaps seeking a look that would redeem her before the darkness. He received a human look, not one of forgiveness, nor of pleasure in the full human, which, for some, hurts more than any sentence. Drive, said the judge. The room rose out of politeness and stood in astonishment. The doors closed behind her with the bureaucratic whisper of ironwork. That was it. The grand opera of lies ended with the hiss of a hinge. The corridor breathed air back into the chests of those who remained. The lawyer gathered up the plastic covers like someone folding maps after crossing. The counselor finally broke his pencil by accident. Ton chuckled softly at the unintentional symbol. Now, work, he said, pointing to the list. Restitution, compliance, internal control reviews, communication to partners. The real world demands roles where fiction required curtains. Ricardo rested a hand on the wall and breathed. His body was taking its toll on the last few weeks. His voice came clear. I don't want our company to become a memorial of fear. I want it to become a school of care. It's doable, the lawyer replied. It starts today. Helena, a few steps behind, observed the high windows, the dust suspended in the air, the light that entered obliquely and opened cracks in the air. She had never seen light like this, homeless, but with a destiny. You're coming with us, Ricardo said, without announcing, without imposing. We have practical things. Documents, protection, housing, and if you don't want anything, we won't force it. I just want an address where the postman won't find me strange, he replied, with a humor that fit into a tiny smile. Then we'll start there, he said, dot the door and the world outside. The press waited. This time, no one ran. The microphones rose like mechanical sunflowers, and there were no shouts. The country seemed to have learned something in that hallway. A word, Mr. Minet, she said politely. Two, he replied, repair and dressed, and you, Helena. She hesitated, then said it the way the streets teach, without adjectives. True. The word stuck. Photographs recorded not the moment of drama, but the measure dot in the car. The lawyer opened an envelope. I've arranged for emergency duplicates of your documents, Helena. We'll begin the process today. Tomorrow, we'll visit the shelter with which Ricardo has already signed an agreement. The company will finance stable positions, training, and legal support. And he looked at her, asking for permission. If you're up for it, we'd like to hear from you about the program's creation. No one understands the street by looking only through the window. Helena remained silent for a few seconds. She couldn't say yes in a hurry. Haste always cost her dearly, but there was a chance there that wasn't a handout. It was a drawing. I'm willing to talk, he said, and I'm willing to learn. And teach, added the silver-haired lady, who was waiting for them in the company lobby with 2 flowers in a simple vase. Teaching is the most elegant way to stay. Helena touched the petals, as if touching a future without asking permission. The sentence ran in discreet footnotes. There was no longer a wedding of the year. There was case of the year closed with protocol. The headline that caught on was the shortest. Coup wedding plan ends in conviction. Below, smaller, a witness without an address becomes the address of truth. Ricardo entered the empty office and turned off all the lights, except one, the lamp on the desk where he always avoided leaving photos. He opened the top drawer and took out the torn He didn't smile or cry. He folded the pieces and put them in a manila envelope with the following written in graphite: lesson. He went down the stairs. The elevator seemed too luxurious for someone who had to feel steps. On the sidewalk, Helena was waiting for him with a coffee in a styrofoam cup. She handed it to him. He accepted. The right gesture, made with the right material. Do you know what I feared most? He asked. It wasn't losing money. It was losing sight of what matters. The street gives you that back quickly, Helena said, with the simplicity of someone who's seen the ground up close. Either you learn, or you don't come back. I want to go back, he replied, to what matters. They walked 2 blocks in silence. Ahead, the shelter was beginning to gather movement. A truck unloading trays from the party that never happened. Quiet laughter. Happy surprise. The motor coordinated. The waiter at the water glass improvised a line that respected the invisible. What was prepared for vanity serves for life, said the counselor, arriving with the paperwork already transformed into a donation list. I like it when phrases take on a new meaning. Helena stopped before the shelter's door. The wood was simple, the paint a little worn, but the handle gleamed, polished by many hands. She turned to him. I'm coming in now, but not to stay. Todo spend. There's a world out there that owes me nothing, and yet it fits within me if I learn the way. We walk together, Ricardo said. It wasn't a big promise. It was a short phrase. Helena nodded, pushed open the door, and disappeared for a second in the yellow light. When she reappeared, she was holding 2 children by the hand, not as a flag, but as everyday life. Their children laughed at some nonsense that didn't fit into any sentence. The first night with a roof. That night, Helen and I slept in a real bed. There were no chandeliers or expensive carpets, just a firm mattress, clean sheets, and the sweet smell of soap. She spent long minutes just staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that this was real. There were no horns. There was no fear of someone kicking her awake. There was no wind cutting through the bones. There was silence, and within him, a kind of peace she barely remembered existed. Before he deleted it, he thought, maybe I survived everything just to get right here. The next morning, the lawyer arrived with a beige briefcase and a discreet smile. Here is your new birth certificate, your new identity card, and your provisional CPF. Helena took the papers with trembling hands. Her eyes welled up. For years, She was just a nameless figure. Now the world recognized her again. It's just paper, the lawyer said kindly. But sometimes, it's what makes the world listen to you. Helena nodded. The street had taught us that dignity does not begin with luxury. Starts with a name that someone calls without hesitation. Meanwhile, Ricardo was in his company, in front of the room that was once planned to be a memorial of achievements. He ordered the expensive paintings removed from the walls, the leather armchairs, the trophies lined up like relics of a cult of one's own ego. Turn it into a training room, he told the counselor. Courses, workshops, legal and psychological support for homeless people. I wanted to be the project's first unit. The counselor looked up from his papers. Are you going to use your name? Ricardo looked out the window, thoughtful. No, she used hers, and so was born, on paper and in intention, the Helena Project. 2 days later, Helena entered that room. She still wore the same borrowed coat, but she walked differently, erect, present, breathing like someone who belonged. There were dozens of people, social workers, educators, managers, lawyers, former homeless people. Ricardo presented it not as a symbol, but as persist. All of this exists because she had courage when everyone else was afraid, he said. But now, what matters is what she wants to build from now on. Helena took a deep breath. She looked at all those people who were looking at her expectantly, and he spoke softly but firmly. I want no one to have to shout to be heard anymore. The sentence hung in the air like a silent oath. The project takes shape in the following days. Helena became a constant presence in the old trophy room. Now under renovation. Walls once covered in golden certificates were being painted in light, simple colors. In place of leather armchairs, there were long tables made of light wood, chalkboards, and low shelves filled with donated books. She participated in everything. She gave her opinion on table arrangements, helped choose educational posters, and discussed with the architects where to install closets for clean clothes and hygiene kits. It doesn't have to look like a hospital, he said. It has to look like a beginning. And each of her sentences, short and direct, that seemed to fit like a brick into the invisible structure of the project. A news crew arrived discreetly, with small cameras and lapel microphones. They wanted to do a story about the woman who prevented the coup of the century. Helena hesitated. The street had taught us that fame usually comes with debts. Ricardo intervened calmly. Tell only what you want, and only what is true. We don't need the rest. She took a deep breath and accepted. The interview took place in a simple corner of the room, without spotlights. Sitting in a regular chair, with her hands clasped in her lap, she simply said, I didn't save a millionaire. I just saw what no one wanted to see, and no one should have to shout for you to be believed. The reporter, who had entered with the attitude of a headline hunter, left with tears in her eyes. The story aired that night with the headline, Helena from the street to the Renaissance, and now opening doors for others. Within a few weeks, the space came to life. The rooms began to receive the first patients. People who still slept in shelters. Young people who fled violent homes, mothers with young children trying to get back on their feet. Helena welcomed them with the simplicity that the street taught her. No forced hugs, no speeches, just presence. She showed them where the lockers were, where they could shower, where they could sit and breathe. Then he would sit down with each one and ask, what do you know how to do well? Many said nothing. She smiled and replied, then let's find out. The change in Helena little by little. Helena's gaze changed. It was no longer the aloof look of someone who expects to be thrown out of any place. It was an attentive, firm gaze, planted on the ground. She laughed, sometimes a short, new laugh, as if she was still testing whether she could. He began writing small notes in a notebook, workshop ideas, names of people he wanted to meet again, memories he wanted to turn into stories for the children at the shelter. I was building not just a project, was making a place for himself in the world. Ricardo would discreetly pass by there every day, but he would remain silent, just watching. I saw Helena talking to the people she was serving, adjusting tables, jotting down ideas, cleaning a corner of the wall with her own hands. And for the first time in a long time, he felt pride not in what he had, but in what he was helping to bring into being. A pride that did not shine. He was breathing. He was breathing. The inauguration day dawned with clear skies, as if the city knew it needed a serene backdrop. The former trophy room was now unrecognizable. Colorful panels, tables with school supplies, bookshelves, plants in simple pots, and the faint aroma of baking bread wafting from the newly installed communal kitchen. Newspapers, radio stations and TV stations sent teams, but Ricardo imposed one condition: no flashes, no glamour, hardly a record. Though glamour arrived, wearing a light blue shirt and simple pants, conversation stopped for a moment. She walked slowly down the aisle to the makeshift stage, as if she was still unsure whether the floor really belonged to her, but every step was firm. There was no rehearsed solemnity, just a microphone and silence. Helena took a deep breath and began, I am not an example of anything, I just didn't want anyone else to lose everything in silence. BAUSOU. He looked at the young people sitting in the first chairs, their eyes restless, some crossing their arms to hide their fear. We learned that we need to shout to be heard, but I want this place to prove otherwise. Here, no one needs to shout. Here, it is enough to exist. The hall burst into heartfelt, unrehearsed applause. No audience applause, applause of belonging. After the speech, Ricardo went up on stage and handed her a small wooden plaque. Helena Project, because courage changes destinies. She held the sign as if holding a piece of her own heart returned. The silver-haired lady placed a handmade necklace made by women from the shelter around her neck and said, smiling, to remember that true beauty can't be bought, it can be built. Helena smiled. This time, without hesitation. The first official day the doors opened. Young people, mothers, elderly people came in. People who had the same look she once had. Look of someone who expects to be sent away before even saying their name, but no one was sent away. They were welcomed with light hugs, hot coffee, and listening. And above all, with respect. As she walked between the tables, Helena heard someone whisper, "She looks like one of us." She stopped, turned and said softly, "It's because I am. When the sun began to set, Ricardo and Helena were left alone at the door of the building. Inside, the lights remained on, illuminating the tables where there were now voices, plans, and open notebooks. "Did you notice?" Ricardo asked, his voice low. "No one talked about money today, only the future." Helena smiled. "Then I think we're on the right track." They were silent for a while, looking at the street not as a threat, but as a horizon. The scar man. Months after the trial, the news brought the final piece of the puzzle. The man with the scar, identified as Marcos Vidal, was arrested when he tried to withdraw money from a fake account in another country. International authorities collaborated with the Brazilian investigation, and the extradition was swift at the custody hearing. He denied nothing. He just said that he had been doing it for so long that he didn't know how to do anything else. Helena heard the news while sitting in the shelter's courtyard, washing her brushes after a painting workshop. Didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He just closed his eyes and murmured, "May someone still see him as a person, before he forgets what he looks like." Afterwards, he went back to painting with the children. 2 years later, time passed silently. As everything that is well cared for passes, the Helena Project grew. There were already 3 units throughout the city. Support centers with temporary shelter, training courses, psychological counseling, legal assistance, and job reintegration programs. On the walls of the rooms were murals made by the patients themselves, strong colors, simple phrases, pieces of stories that no one wanted to hear before. Now they were. They're taped together and pried some former homeless. People were already working as counselors in the new units. They had name tags on them, names that were now recognized, spoken, respected. Helena greeted them one by one, asking how they were, listening with the attention of someone who knows that every small step forward costs a world. Helena's new life. She now lived in a small, sunny apartment with large windows and plants on the balconies. "I liked to wake up early, make coffee, and write down my memories of the street in my notebook, not as a regret, but as a map so that others could get out of it. I still used public transport." He still wore simple clothes, but there was something new in his stance. She walked upright, like someone who belonged. He also had a badge with his full name and position, Humanization Coordinator of the Helena Project. When she saw him for the first time, she cried. Now she smiled every time she pinned it to her blouse. Ricardo, another man. Ricardo had also changed. He no longer spent his nights chasing spreadsheets and numbers that grew like vanity mirrors. He had learned to say no calmly, and yes carefully. I visited the project every week, but unannounced, just to sit in a corner and listen to the sound of life happening. The counselor said he looked younger. He replied, "No, just lighter." He kept a small board in his office with Helena's first sentence on the day of the inauguration. "Here, no one needs to shout to be heard." It was the only trophy left on the walls. That autumn, Helena was honored by the city council with a medal for social merit. She was discreet, tried to refuse, but the team insisted. On the day of the ceremony, she wore a simple light blue dress, the same shade she had chosen for the walls of the first center. He received the medal, thanked them in a few words, and, at the end, said, "I didn't start Project Helena to change the world. I started so that the world wouldn't change those who still have a chance." The auditorium fell silent, and then he gave a standing ovation. At the event entrance, a young woman approached her with a project badge around her neck. "I used to sleep on the sidewalk on Avenida Norte," she said shyly. "Now I teach computer science here." Helena smiled. "So you understand everything. It's not about where we slept. It's about where we decide to wake up." The young woman laughed, her eyes shining. Then she ran to the bus that would take her to a night class. Helena stood still for a moment, looking up at the copper-colored sky, and he thought that maybe this was what they called a miracle. Not something that appears out of nowhere, but something that blossoms where no one expected anything else. That night, she walked home slowly. She passed a square where she had already slept wrapped in a thin blanket. Now there were children running, a dog chasing a ball, yellow lights on the streetlights, and she smiled not out of nostalgia, but out of victory. When he arrived at the building, he found Ricardo waiting at the gate with 2 cups of coffee. They sat on the bench in the entrance, in silence for a few minutes. "Do you know what changed everything?" he asked finally. "What? You didn't want glory. You wanted justice, and justice, when it is true, opens the way for life to return. Helena rested her head on his shoulder. They didn't need to say anything else there, where one day lies almost destroyed everything. The truth now blossomed, in silence, and with deep roots. The hall was empty. The chandeliers went out, the fallen petals were swept away, and the echoes of that day became just a memory. Ricardo moved on stronger, lighter. Helena found not only a home but a place in the world, and the woman who tried to take it all was left with nothing but her own silence. But in the end, this is not just the story of a failed coup. It's the story of how the courage of a single invisible person can change entire destinies. Because sometimes, enough is enough. A firm voice at the right to prevent love from becoming a trap, and to transform ruins into new beginnings. If this story touched you, leave your like, share with someone who needs to hear this, and download the ebook with more than 50 real and exciting stories like this one. Stories that will keep you hooked from beginning to end and show that, even in the cruelest world, there is still light waiting to be lit, because the truth may take time, but when it arrives, rebuilds everything.